Chapter 392. The Black Death branch, transformed from the dead with staff, couldn't even break Li Daocheng's protective spiritual Highland shield. The expression on Granny Blood Demon's old face changed from anger to astonishment. The kid in front of her was actually a Jean Dan cultivator. As one of the three elders of the Blood Knife Society, Granny Blood Demon was only at the middle stage of Jean Dan. She could ignore everything below Jean Dan and destroy them with a flip of her hand. However, the Jean Dan stage was different. Even if it was an early-stage Jean Dan cultivator who had just condensed a Jean Dan, it wasn't easy to kill them. Even if Granny Blood Demon had condensed a Jean Dan more than 100 years ago, the path of cultivation had always been more difficult as one progressed. Granny Blood Demon's previous arrogance disappeared in an instant, and even her anger was restrained. There was a bit of fear in her old eyes that were emitting a strange brilliance. To be able to step into the Jean Dan stage at such a young age, he was undoubtedly a genius. Moreover, he had already surpassed ordinary geniuses and belonged to the ranks of the top geniuses. Granny Blood Demon suddenly had some doubts. In the Federation, there were no more than 10 people who could condense a Jean Dan before the age of 20. All of them were geniuses of the Federation and were famous. Why hadn't she seen this kid before? If it was just an ordinary early-stage Jean Dan cultivator, Granny Blood Demon still wouldn't pay attention to him. However, it was another matter for the top geniuses. They were invincible in the same level and could even fight and win. In other words, this kid in front of her was at the early stage of Jean Dan, but his strength was at least at the middle stage of Jean Dan. Granny Blood Demon suddenly felt a slight chill on her back. Li Daocheng's hand that was holding Tsang ink loosened. Tsang ink turned into a light shadow and fell under his feet, floating slightly by relying on Li Daocheng. Li Daocheng flicked his finger and a bolt of lightning shot out. With a crack, the Black Death tree in front of her was split in half by the lightning, reverting to the dead with staff and breaking into two pieces. Granny Blood Demon snorted, and her chi and blood surged. The Black Death tree was transformed with her support, so it was destroyed by an external force and would suffer backlash. So strong? Granny Blood Demon's heart skipped a beat. Her fighting spirit plummeted. The probability of a mid-stage Jean Dan demon being frightened by an early-stage Jean Dan human was only 1 in 10,000. Demons of the same level would always be stronger than humans. This was determined by their innate physiques. Demons were born with strong bodies, long lifespans, and the ability to transform. Most of them were born with divine strength and innate abilities. These were all things that humans could not compare to. But at this moment, Granny Blood Demon was inexplicably afraid of Li Daocheng, just like a lower-level cultivator facing a higher-level cultivator. "Who are you?" Granny Blood Demon tried her best to restrain the fear in her heart as she asked. "Dead people don't need to know," Li Daocheng said calmly. As he spoke, Li Daocheng opened his palm and 2 wrinkled talismans appeared. "Damn you, brat. You sure talk big. Don't think that you're so arrogant just because you're talented. Do you think that the Demon Clan is the same as you humans? Granny will let you experience the terror of the Demon Clan today." As Granny Blood Demon spoke, her old and shriveled body began to grow rapidly. Monstrous aura surged from her body. Lu Feng and Qing Huang were already injured. At this moment, they were enveloped by the strong, monstrous aura. They felt extremely uncomfortable, as if they were about to be ignited. In just a few seconds, Granny Blood Demon turned into a giant 8-clawed spider. Other than her face, she no longer had any human form. After the Demon Clan transformed, their strength would rise to another level and reach their ultimate form. Although they could not maintain it for too long, it was enough to deal with a battle. Li Daocheng's expression did not change at all, but there was a bit of curiosity in his eyes. He had seen many dark ghosts and human cultivators. This was only the second time he had encountered a Demon Clan. The first time was with Princess Catherine and the other 5 Demon Clan members. However, their strength was not considered strong. Compared to Granny Blood Demon, who had transformed, Princess Catherine and the others were just a few small insects. But the current Li Daocheng was no longer the Li Daocheng from before. Li Daochong was a bug-like existence here. As his level continued to rise, Li Daochong's state of mind also changed. His understanding of the hot-blooded upgrader also deepened. Young man, I made you wait for a long time. Granny Blood Demon's voice was no longer the voice of an old woman. Instead, it was sharp and ear-piercing, as if it came from the abyss. It's okay. Wait a little longer. As Li Daochong spoke, he suddenly paused, and his expression changed. He sensed that 20 to 30 kilometers away, Li Tianyang's aura was changing. His father was fighting with someone. Are there others? Li Daochong changed the topic, his tone as cold as frost. Why? Are you afraid? Granny Blood Demon sneered. It's right to be afraid. You shouldn't have provoked the Blood Knife Society. While speaking, Li Daochong sensed that his father's aura had weakened. Blue-gold sparks crackled in his eyes, and the 2 talismans in his hands whistled out. These were 2 level 9 spirit energy talismans, 1 fire and 1 ice. They were also Li Daochong's last 2 level 9 spirit talismans. The rest were used when he fought against the group of ghosts on the Death Star. There was also a level 10 spirit talisman that Li Daochong did not use. Granny Blood Demon sensed danger and spat out a blood-colored spiderweb from her mouth to block the 2 spirit talismans. Level 9 spirit talismans are useless against me. If it was a level 10 spirit talisman, I would really have to retreat. Granny Blood Demon blocked the 2 spirit talismans proudly. The blood-colored spiderweb directly wrapped the 2 spirit talismans. Boom! The 2 spirit talismans exploded in the spiderweb. All the energy was compressed in the spiderweb. With a bang, the spiderweb turned into powder, and the 2 forces canceled each other out. Zong! Song flashed by. Granny Blood Demon did not have time to react. Her body suddenly shook. No, impossible. Granny Blood Demon trembled and spat out a few words in horror. A line of blood appeared on her face. Li Daochong had unknowingly swung his blade, and Granny Blood Demon did not see it clearly. The defense of the monster race's flesh was comparable to that of the human race's Taoist robes. In her spider form, Granny Blood Demon was equivalent to wearing spider-shaped armor. Even if a Gene Dan cultivator of a human race cut with a weapon, in most cases, it would not leave a trace. But at this moment, she was cut in half by a blade. Lu Feng and Qing Huang were dumbfounded as they watched the terrifying giant spider split in half and fall to the sides. No time to see your horror. Li Daochong dropped a sentence and soared into the sky, smashing through the Heavenly Palace Club and flying away. Only Lu Feng and Blue Phoenix were left standing there in a daze. They stared at Granny Blood Demon's spider body that had been split in half, exploding from the inside out. The rend effect then erupted, leaving behind a pool of black blood and nothing else. A blood-red Yao core fell to the ground. Lu Feng and Qing Huang looked at each other and were about to go forward to see what happened when a monster core flew into the sky and disappeared as if it was sucked in by a suction force. At this moment, Li Daochong was already several kilometers away. The monster core fell into his hand. After taking a look at the monster core, Li Daochong immediately put it into his storage bag. Then, a dazzling brilliance burst out from his body. With a bang, he shot out like a cannonball. A strange phenomenon appeared in the night sky, and the space seemed to be compressed. The entire Tianyuan city could see the brilliance of the waste that suddenly appeared in the sky, but it disappeared in an instant. It was like a meteor streaking across the night sky. In the sky above the old mansion, the members of the Blood Knife Society looked down with contempt. Li Qianyang's final attack was nothing more than a desperate attack by an ordinary lone wolf against a desolate beast. Although a lone wolf was brave, in front of a desolate beast, a desperate attack was futile. This was because the lone wolf's sharp teeth had even pierced through the desolate beast's skin. From beginning to end, the Blood Ape King hadn't used his full strength. To him, this was nothing more than a game to pass time. Li Tianyang stood in the giant pit covered in wounds, but there was still no fear in his eyes. He spat out a mouthful of blood. "Hairy monkey, is this all you've got? That useless blade of yours didn't even feel anything when it hit me. Is that blade used to shave fur?" You're still so stubborn even when you're about to die. You humans are really good at talking. No other race can compare to you. Die. The Blood Ape King didn't seem to care about what Li Tianyang said, but in fact, every time Li Tianyang called him a hairy monkey, he would be furious. Now that the Sky Devil Blood Blade was called a shaving blade, the Blood Ape King was hopping mad. Although the three great clans in the prison in the sky didn't have a good impression of Li Tianyang as fellow clansmen, they couldn't help but feel pity for him when they saw the Blue Bay Star's #1 expert about to be killed. Li Daochong really shouldn't have provoked the Blood Knife Society. This time, he killed his father. Li Daochong killed his father, and now he's killed us too. Many people shook their heads and sighed. The blood blade in the Blood Ape King's hand suddenly buzzed, and the huge blade seemed to dance happily. Boss is going to use that move. It's just a slightly stronger mouse. Using this move feels like cutting off a sparrow's head with a butcher's knife. Li Tianyang forced himself to take a deep breath and pulled out his spear to fight again. However, as soon as he moved, a bloody light shrouded him, completely suppressing him and making him unable to move. The Blood Ape King smiled coldly. Less than 5 people have seen this move of mine. You should feel honored to die under the Blood Moon Blade. As he spoke, the Blood Ape King swept the blood blade in his hand horizontally, and a bloody moon appeared. A terrifying bloody color exploded in the darkness, dyeing half of Tianyuan City red. Just when everyone thought Li Tianyang was definitely going to die, a piercing sound came from afar. In the blink of an eye, an inky brilliance flashed over. It was so fast that it was like teleportation. A huge Tsung ink blade light that was dozens of meters long slashed over like a tsunami. The 9th level of the 9-split blade technique, 9-split blade cut. The bloody moon and Tsung ink blade light collided. Boom! A dazzling light exploded. Chapter 393. Many of the Blood Knife Society's cultivators were sent flying by the shockwave, and the people from the 3 great clans in the cages were even more miserable. Many people were sent flying by the powerful shockwave and slammed into the walls of the spirit magnetic cage, their faces immediately swollen and bruised. Hu Ling, who was the closest, had no choice but to support her protective aura to barely resist. No one knew what had happened. Only the Blood Ape King stared at the young man who appeared out of nowhere and instantly rescued Li Tianyang from the huge pit. When the shockwave gradually dissipated, the slums that had been filled with dilapidated bungalows not long ago had turned into a scorched land. On the empty scorched land, Li Daochong supported Li Tianyang and landed on a broken piece of land dozens of meters away. Li Daochong, someone in the cage, stuttered. The others looked at Li Daochong in surprise. Although it was night, there was not a single cloud in the night sky. A huge half-moon hung in the sky, and the cold moonlight shone on the ground, making everything clear. Even an idiot could see that Li Daochong was different from before. No, impossible. Someone else immediately spoke up. This voice expressed the thoughts of everyone in the 3 great clans. They all sensed that Li Daochong's aura had undergone a qualitative change. Jin Dan's stage. But how was this possible? Although Li Daochong was already ridiculously strong at the Jade Splendor Hotel, he was clearly only in the late stage of foundation establishment at that time. Only 10 days had passed, and he had already condensed Jin Dan. Not to mention the Federation. Even in the 3 great cultivation empires, they were probably as rare as phoenix feathers and Qilin horns. But the truth was right in front of them, and they had no choice but to believe it. The people from the Blood Knife Society were also surprised, but they were not surprised by Li Daochong's sudden increase in cultivation, but by his ability to block the Blood Ape King's killing move. Hu Ling-er's beautiful eyes flickered, and a hint of astonishment appeared on her beautiful face. At this moment, she could only see Li Daochong's side profile. This strange young man made her feel fear from the bottom of her heart. This was the second time in more than 30 years that Hu Ling-er had such a feeling. The last time was not that long ago, when she saw that person in the Federation's Central Star Field 3 years ago. However, the 2 times were slightly different. When she faced that person, Ling felt an unstoppable might. However, the young man in front of her gave her an unfathomable feeling of the unknown. The former was domineering and biting cold, while the latter was gentle, but it made one's heart turn cold. If this king is not wrong, you are Li Daochong, the one who killed 4 core members of my Blood Knife Society. Although the Blood Ape King was shocked that the young man could block his Blood Moon will slash, he was relieved after checking the young man's cultivation. No matter how strong Jin Dan was, he would not be a match for Zhang Xian. That saber gleam must have been augmented by something special, or a superior mystical spiritual treasure, or a level 10 or above energy talisman. Otherwise, how could a primary Jin Dan be able to release such a powerful attack? Li Daochong ignored the Blood Ape King's question and helped Li Tianyang up. Dad, are you okay? Haha, of course I'm fine. I can still fight another 300 rounds, cough cough. Li Tianyang laughed loudly, but then he coughed violently. His internal injuries were not light. A stream of pure spiritual qi was transferred into Li Tianyang's body, making him feel much better and stopping his coughing. Li Daochong stabilized Li Tianyang's injuries and said calmly, Dad, stand a little further away. Watch how I pull out that monkey's fur one by one. Okay, remember not to pull them out one by one. Pull them out in bunches. That's the most satisfying way, Li Tianyang replied. The father and son completely ignored the others and did not hide their conversation at all. The last sentence sounded rather comical in the ears of the others. Were the father and son's brains damaged? What did they think the Blood Ape King was? Was he really a monkey? That was a peak Jin Dan cultivator, and he was also a demon. Even though the Blood Ape King was only a peak Jin Dan cultivator, his strength had already reached a terrifying level. He was considered to be in the middle of the Federation. Above him was a great cultivator like Yuanying, who was a true immortal. Exalted immortal of the Blood Knife Society. Every injustice has its perpetrator, and every debt has its debtor. The real culprit is here. Can you let us go? A weaker Gu family worshipper said to the Blood Knife Society's law enforcement hall master, Battle Lion Cha Deli, who was floating in front of the cage with a long face. The fluffy blonde Cha Deli did not even look at that cultivator. He extended his hand, and his steel-like black fingernails pierced through that cultivator's head. The other cultivators in the cage were all horrified. This group of demons did not play by the rules. They killed as they pleased. Your Blood Knife Society is so overbearing. Do you really think that the Federation will not pursue the matter? Someone could not stand it anymore and said sternly. Whoosh! A long sword shot into the cage. Pucci! The heart of the cultivator who spoke was pierced, and he fell down unwillingly with his eyes wide open. Uncle Wang! Orson roared. His eyes were red as he rushed forward to hug that cultivator. Uncle Wang was a worshipper of the House of Oku. He had stayed in the House of Oku since he was young and specialized in teaching the underage disciples of the House of Oku. He had watched Orson grow up, and because Orson was very much to Uncle Wang's liking, he often gave Orson special treatment and taught him many battle techniques. Uncle Wang had contributed greatly to Orson's achievements today. In the family, other than a few blood relatives, Orson liked Uncle Wang the most. At this moment, Uncle Wang was killed just because he said one sentence. Orson's anger could not be suppressed. Just as Orson was about to explode, someone tapped his lower back. The old ancestor of the House of Oku, Ao Fuhai, saw that Orson had lost control of his emotions and instantly took action to control him. With Orson's temperament, he would definitely curse out loud. Given the style of the Blood Knife Society, he would be killed in the next moment. Orson stood in place with bloodshot eyes. He only hated that he was not strong enough. If anyone barks again, I will kill all of you, a Blood Knife Society cultivator angrily rebuked. In the cage, the cultivators of the Blue Bay Star no longer dared to make a sound. Everyone was in danger. Even the old ancestor of the 3 great clans, Jin Dan, was silent. Bastard, what's with that look? That Blood Knife Society cultivator saw Orson glaring at him and scolding him. As he spoke, he was about to draw his long sword. The old ancestor of the House of Oku, Ao Fuhai, anxiously said, "Immortal, please calm down." However, before he could finish his sentence, that Blood Knife Society cultivator had already made his move. His long sword shot towards Orson like lightning. Whoosh! At that moment, a Tsang ink brilliance flashed and shattered the flying long sword. The Blood Knife Society cultivator, who was still threatening half a second ago, stared down in disbelief. Bang! His head exploded, and a headless corpse fell from the sky. The Tsang ink saber belonged to Li Daochong, but no one saw when he made his move. Even the Blood Ape King did not see it clearly. Daring to kill a core member of the Blood Knife Society in front of him was a blatant provocation. No, it was a humiliation to the Blood Knife Society. "You're courting death." The Blood Ape King was furious. The Sky Devil Blood Saber in his hand buzzed and turned into a blood-red light that shot towards Li Daochong. The Blood Knife Society cultivators, who were looking down on the ground and waiting to watch a good show, saw the Vice Hall Master of the Law Enforcement Hall get insta-killed. Their expressions clearly changed. Their eyes were filled with vigilance, afraid that they would fall for the same trick. Some of them even quietly flew away to distance themselves. War Lion Cha Deli frowned. "What are you afraid of? Whoever takes a step back will die. The Blood Knife Society doesn't want cowards." Whoosh! As soon as Cha Deli finished speaking, a saber gleam flashed. Less than 10 meters away from him, a Blood Knife Society cultivator was split in half. Blood rained down from the sky, and the halved corpse fell to the ground. Li Daochong appeared in the air 10 meters away from Cha Deli. When the Blood Ape King slashed with his saber, Li Daochong's figure was nowhere to be seen. There was nothing but air. As soon as Cha Deli finished speaking, Li Daochong appeared in front of him. A bean-sized bead of sweat dripped down from the back of his head. Li Daochong did not even look at Cha Deli as he disappeared again. Several Tsang ink lights flashed in the air. Several Blood Knife Society cultivators were killed before they could even react. The remaining Blood Knife Society cultivators could no longer hold back and fled in all directions. When Li Daochong appeared again, he was less than 5 meters away from Cha Deli. He said faintly, "They ran away. They're all cowards. You can go and kill them now." Cha Deli was so angry that he almost vomited blood. "Oh, that's right. Open the cage before you go after them. I'll give you 10 seconds. Otherwise, die." Li Daochong turned around and slashed with his saber after he said that. The Blood Ape King's attack missed. He was stunned for a moment before he reacted. When he looked up, he saw that Li Daochong was about to kill. The Blood Ape King was fuming with anger. The Blood Knife Society had never been played like this before. He stomped his feet and shot into the air. Clang! The Tsang ink and the Blood Knife Society clashed, producing an ear-piercing sound. Chapter 394. Give you 10 seconds? Or die. Cha Deli suspected that there was something wrong with his ears. Who did this brat think he was? A Yuanian cultivator? If that was the case, Cha Deli was terrified immediately. This brat, who was merely at the early stage of Jin Dan, dared to say such words to him. What a joke. Cha Deli's eyes flashed with killing intent. He wanted to tear this brat into pieces. The Blood Ape King and Li Daochong exchanged a blow, but neither of them had the upper hand. How could this brat be so strong? The Blood Ape King's arm was slightly numb from the impact, and his eyes were filled with shock. Li Daochong moved back a few meters, holding the Tsang ink in his hand. There was a crack on the blade, and the Tsang ink was injured. The Blood Ape King's blood saber was a mystical spiritual treasure, which was one grade higher than the Tsang ink. In a fight of the same strength, the Tsang ink was at a disadvantage. At the Jin Dan stage, the Heaven-class superior Tsang ink could no longer withstand the destruction of this level. Li Daochong's eyes narrowed slightly. It was time for the Tsang ink to be upgraded. In a flash, Li Daochong transferred a stream of spiritual qi into the Tsang ink from his palm, and it charged toward the Blood Ape King without stopping. The saber was the most domineering weapon among all the weapons. It was more ferocious than a sword, more agile than a spear, sharper than a staff, and more direct than a chain. Among the 9 short weapons, the saber was ranked first. Both the Blood Ape King and Li Daocheng used sabers, but the Blood Saber was a huge saber with a huge blade. It weighed more than 1,000 pounds and was reinforced by the Blood Soul. It was an ethereal spirit treasure. The Song Ink's blade was not huge. It was only 4 fingers wide and was shaped like a horse chopper. It had a straight back and a longer hilt. It could be held with 1 hand or with 2 hands. The blade was also longer than normal blades. Not counting the hilt, it was 2 meters long. Including the hilt, the total length was more than 6 meters. It weighed about 150 kilograms. Although it was also classified as a heavy weapon, it was still far from the weight of the Blood Saber. However, the heavier the weapon, the better. It depended on whether the weapon was suitable for the user. After old Ghost Zhang added the melted crystal, the Tsang ink became a high-grade heaven-ranked magic treasure. It was still lacking an item spirit to become a mystical spiritual treasure. If it was just a fight, Tsang ink was obviously not Blood Knife's opponent. Therefore, Tsang ink was injured by this attack, while Blood Saber was unscathed. Although Li Daocheng's heart ached, this was clearly not the time to be concerned about the weapon's damage. He shot out like lightning and slashed horizontally with the saber in his hand. There was nothing fancy about it. Li Daocheng had always used the 9 split saber arts separately. This set of martial arts did not have much continuity. Each stage was independent, and its power went from small to large and from low to high. At this moment, Li Daocheng was using it continuously, starting from the first layer. This saber technique was the one that Li Daocheng used the most. It was also the technique that he was most comfortable with. He had long since perfected it. However, Li Daocheng was still using the 9 split saber technique in succession. Before the Jindan period, Li Daocheng definitely would not have dared to do this. This was because if he did, before he could finish using the saber technique, he would already be a lamp without oil. With the endless supply of spirit qi from Jindan, this saber technique, which should be a heaven-ranked technique, could be used continuously without restraint. The first layer, shattering rock and splitting earth. The second layer, collapsing mountain and splitting earth. The third layer, splitting earth and sinking sea. The fourth layer, breaking sky strike. The fifth layer, splitting star strike. The sixth layer, splitting sun strike. The seventh layer, splitting void. The eighth layer, splitting air strike. The ninth layer, 9 split saber. In the void, the Tsang ink-colored saber light scattered in all directions like a heavenly maiden scattering flowers. It lit up the entire night sky, and even the light of the half-moon was covered. The Tsang ink saber in Li Daocheng's hand flashed with lightning as it was swung out again and again. After the Blood Ape King received 3 saber attacks, blood seeped out from the web between his thumb and forefinger. Shocked, he did not dare to hold back anymore. The Blood Moon Saber technique was used at full power. This technique was the famous technique of the Blood Ape King. Once, when he was fighting for territory with other underground forces in the outer Ring Star area, he used this technique to kill dozens of powerful opponents. This was one of the few complete techniques that had been passed down from the demon race. Although it was only a common mystery technique and had not reached the level of a spiritual martial technique, it was still a very powerful technique. Without the Jindan period, he would not even be able to use it. Dang, dang, dang. Boom, boom, boom. After every crisp sound in the void, there would be a loud explosion. Under the intense collision of the 2 powerful forces, there would be a shocking explosion. In a few seconds, no one knew how many saber attacks had been exchanged. No one could see clearly. The dazzling light almost made everyone unable to look at it directly. The cultivators of the Blue Bay Star were completely scared out of their wits. They stood in the cage with their mouths agape as they looked at Li Daocheng, who was fighting the Blood Ape King to a draw. That was a peak Jindan cultivator. Everyone's brain could not process it. They had once again underestimated Li Daocheng's strength. Transparent liquid flowed out of Orson's nose. He had always thought that he still had a chance to catch up to Li Daochong, or at least get close. But after seeing Li Daochong in action once, he knew that the next time he saw him in action, this guy's strength would definitely increase by leaps and bounds. Li Daochong's growth speed could no longer be estimated using common sense. It was so heaven-defying that it was unbelievable. Gu Chao and Ao Kuchuan, the two geniuses of the Blue Bay Star, looked at each other and saw bitter smiles on each other's faces. Half a year ago, they were above Li Daochong in terms of fame and strength. But now they cannot catch up. What was even more frightening was that Li Daochong was only at the early stage of the Jindan realm. He was now fighting against someone who was 3 small realms higher than him. The Blood Knife Society was even better. The cultivators who had escaped earlier were floating a few kilometers away and watching from afar. They were completely dumbfounded at this moment. The Blood Knife Society had originally come to the Blue Bay Star to torture people. They were allowed to wreak havoc in this rural area. Who would have thought that there would be such a monster here? He was actually able to fight the Blood Ape King to a draw. This was 2F** King terrifying. The more Cha Deli watched, the more shocked and scared he became. He lowered his head and looked at the key in his hand. He had to consider whether he should guard the door or not. 7 or 8 seconds had already passed. Boom! Another earth-shattering sound rang out. Cha Deli was so scared that his head shrank back. Without any hesitation, he quickly turned around and opened the spirit energy magnetic cage. The dozens of cultivators from the 3 great clans finally regained their freedom. When the Blood Ape King saw this, he was so angry that his lungs were about to explode. Cha Deli, you're afraid of him, but aren't you afraid of me? Who told you to let them go? Cha Deli gulped. Boss, this kid's level has far exceeded our expectations. Let's not even talk about whether we can kill him. Even if we can, if the Federation finds out that the Blood Knife Society killed such a monstrous genius, they won't let us go. The Blood Ape King snorted coldly. Not long ago, the shifters from the Ankuan Empire contacted me. If the Shanghua Federation dares to touch the Blood Knife Society, I'll just go to Ankuan. In the Ankuan Empire, Cha Deli's heart skipped a beat. His hanging heart calmed down a little. When he saw Li Daochong's heaven-defying combat power, his desire to go on a crusade had completely disappeared. A super genius like this would be protected anywhere. Once he matured, he would be an important force in resisting the Hades. Don't go anywhere. Just stay in the Blue Bay Star. It's pretty good here. Chapter 395. The Blood Ape King sneered. Let's see if you have what it takes to keep me here. Li Daochong glanced at the chipped song ink. If it wasn't for the fact that his weapon wasn't good enough, he would have defeated the Blood Ape King just now. You're just a sparring partner for me after I enter Jindan. Li Daochong's voice wasn't loud, but it could still be heard from a few kilometers away. Hiss! The self-cultivators who were watching from afar all gasped. Didn't Li Daochong mean that he wasn't serious about the fight with the Blood Ape King? How arrogant! Kid, do you think I'm serious? It's time to end this. The Blood Ape King's face darkened. Immediately after, the Blood Ape King's body expanded rapidly. His already thick hair grew crazily. Li Daochong floated in the air and watched the Blood Ape King's transformation quietly. He had no intention of taking advantage of the situation. The Blood Ape King continued to grow and turned into a crimson giant ape in an instant. With a thud, he landed on the ground. A small crater appeared on the ground. The crimson giant ape that the Blood Ape King transformed into was like a wild beast. It was more than 10 meters tall, and its arms were as thick as trees. Its palms were as big as a small house. This reminded Li Daochong of a movie called King Kong from his previous life. Other than the color of its hair, there wasn't much difference. Oh, in that face, it was even more wrinkled than King Kong. The Blood Ape King's demonic aura soared to the sky. It was stronger than before, and its aura spread a few kilometers away. The rats that were hiding in the holes all came out of their holes and fled as if they had sensed danger. Li Daochong slowly descended from the sky. Song Inc. tossed it into his storage bag. Song Inc. couldn't withstand a higher level of battle. If he continued using it, it would shatter completely. This meant that Li Daocheng couldn't use the 9-split saber technique that he was best at. However, this was not a problem. He still had a lot of trump cards, such as the 10th level talisman, the Fist of Rupturing, and a Heavenly Thunder spell, Eye of Thunder Punishment. Li Daocheng had entered the Jin Dan realm, and the strength of his telekinesis had once again condensed. It was more than 3 times stronger than before, and when it spread out, even the wind and the grass within 100 kilometers would not be able to escape his detection. When it condensed into a line, it could even extend more than 1,000 miles. It was enough to be comparable to a peak Jin Dan cultivator. With a test subject like the Blood Ape King, it would be a waste not to use it. Li Daocheng really wanted to know how strong he was after his advancement. The experiment began. The Blood Ape King let out a deafening roar and slammed its giant palm down at Li Daocheng. Dodge! Orson, who was watching from afar, sensed the power of the Blood Ape King and said nervously. However, in the distance, Li Daocheng had no intention of dodging. He stood there and looked up at the falling giant palm. The only one who did not leave the battlefield was Hu Ling'er. Even Cha Deli kept a distance, not wanting to be affected by the aftermath of the battle between the two monsters. Hu Ling'er's eyes flashed with a strange light. She muttered, "Is he going to take it head on? Isn't he looking down on the Blood Ape King too much?" The transformed Blood Ape King can move mountains and fill seas. His strength has increased exponentially. The peak Jin Dan cultivators of the human race are no match for him. With his palm, even a small shuttle will be smashed into a metal pancake. Li Daocheng looked at the giant palm and muttered, "The 5th style of the Fist of Rupturing, Sky-Piercing Strike." The punch was ordinary, as if it was just a simple punch in the air. After the Blood Ape King transformed, his mind was slightly deranged. Before the demon race reached the Yuanying realm, it was very difficult for them to completely stabilize their minds after transforming. Their bestial instincts would take over. The Jin Dan realm was much better, but those below the Jin Dan realm would basically lose their minds after transforming. Roar! The Blood Ape King let out a loud roar and increased the strength of his giant palm. In the distance, the cultivators of the Blue Bay star could not bear to watch. A few female cultivators turned their faces away, as if they could already see the scene of Li Daocheng being smashed into meat paste by the giant ape. Thump! Thump! The scene of Li Daocheng being smashed into meat paste did not happen. The giant blood-red ape's palm slammed down and covered Li Daocheng's entire body. However, it immediately stopped and could not press down any further. At that moment, it seemed to have stopped. Then, the giant ape was rebounded by some kind of huge force. Its giant palm seemed to have been flung away by something huge. Even its giant body could not stand steadily and fell to the ground. Li Daocheng stood there as if he did nothing. He jumped lightly onto the giant ape's chest and punched again and again. Thump! 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 The sound of drums shook the sky. The entire Tianyuan city was trembling. Every time Li Daocheng's fist landed on the giant ape's chest, a small dent would appear on its rock-hard and wall-like chest. In the time it took to take a breath, Li Daocheng had punched hundreds of times. Countless fist-shaped dents appeared on the giant ape's chest. Li Daocheng's punches were extremely powerful. Even when he used the Fist of Rupture, he only left a dent on the giant ape's chest. If he had hit any other object, he would have been able to shatter it with a single punch. A peak-stage golden core, transformed great demon, was able to withstand Li Daocheng's terrifying punch with just his physical body. Even the crack effect was blocked. Li Daocheng could not help but be shocked. The demon race's physical body was indeed powerful. It was something the humans could not compare to. When one's body grew larger, their agility and speed would naturally decrease. This was unavoidable. However, their strength would increase crazily. Their resistance and defense would also increase exponentially. By the time the giant ape reacted, Li Daocheng had already finished punching. Puffed. The giant ape spat out a mouthful of blood. For such a huge creature, this mouthful of blood was as much as a vat. Li Daocheng tapped his foot and leaped back. dodging the blood rain. The moment he leaped, he reached out and grabbed a large handful of blood-colored ape hair. With a fierce tug, he tore off a large clump of blood. Roar! The giant ape's mouth was full of blood as it let out a painful roar. The cultivators watching from afar, whether they were the cultivators of the Blue Bay Star or the cultivators of the Blood Knife Society, all opened their mouths wide and looked at Li Daochong as if they were looking at a monster. He actually made the giant ape vomit blood. From afar, Li Daochong looked like a little person from the Little Kingdom, while the giant ape was of normal size. The little person jumped onto the giant's chest and punched it a few times. The giant vomited blood. This kind of visual impact made people dumbfounded. Hu Ling's beautiful eyes bloomed with dazzling brilliance, and the way she looked at Li Daochong suddenly changed. When Li Daochong appeared, Hu Ling felt pressure, then curiosity, then anticipation, and now she was completely attracted. The beastly nature of the demon race always existed in their bones. The law of the jungle had always been an unchanging law within the demon race. Demon women only liked the strong. As for what they looked like, what body shape, and what race they were, it didn't matter to them at all. Natural selection, survival of the fittest, was the way of the king that the demon race believed in. This was the case during the demon race's heyday, and it was even more so now that the demon race had declined. The demon race needed to mate with the strong to produce a powerful next generation. The Nine-Tailed Fox clan was almost wiped out by the Hades. Hu Ling shouldered the responsibility of revitalizing the Nine-Tailed Fox clan. The reason she joined the Blood Knife Society was because she had her eyes on the Blood Ape King. However, the Blood Ape King wasn't enough to tempt Hu Ling. She only wanted to obtain the Blood Ape King's demon essence. She was going to wait until the Blood Ape King became Yuanying before taking it. After obtaining the demon essence, Hu Ling could directly give birth to a demon fetus without a male demon. Moreover, the Nine-Tailed Fox bloodline would be completely preserved and would not be diluted. In fact, the best choice for a Nine-Tailed Fox was a human. The demon race's bloodline would almost never be diluted. It might even be stronger and have the spirituality of a human, weakening the beastly nature. However, the biggest drawback of mixing with a human was that the probability of producing a next generation was very low. It might take 100 years or even longer to conceive. If luck was bad, it might not even be possible to conceive in a few hundred years. If she couldn't meet a truly talented human, waiting endlessly was meaningless. Hu Ling didn't want to wait that long, so she targeted the Blood Ape King. There weren't many powerful demons in the Shenghua Federation. The selection was very low. Hu Ling didn't want to go outside the Federation for the time being. The three cultivation empires were too dangerous. If she wasn't careful, she would be in danger. This was because humans had never given up on enslaving demons. The Shenghua Federation was much gentler to demons than the three cultivation empires. This was mainly because of the threat of the Hades. The Shenghua Federation needed all allies and couldn't make any more enemies. Hu Ling looked at Li Daochong with two little stars in her eyes. Bone age less than 20 years old. Early Jindan. There probably weren't many of them in the entire human race. While Hu Ling's thoughts were running wild, Li Daochong and the giant Ape King's battle continued. The Blood Ape King spat out a lot of blood, but it didn't hurt his foundation. He only spat out a mouthful of blood from his chest. Roar! The giant Ape King roared again. However, this time, it wasn't out of anger but pain. Crack, crack, crack. The giant Ape King's bones began to shrink, making ear-piercing sounds as if bones were breaking. Its huge body shrank at a speed visible to the naked eye. The Blood Ape King saw that he couldn't defeat Li Daochong with his strength. Instead, he became even more of a burden, so he entered his second battle form. In the next moment, the 10-meter-tall giant Ape King shrank to 2 meters tall. The fist marks on his chest disappeared as if they were never there. You should be proud to be able to force me to use my second form, the Blood Ape King said seriously with a vigilant expression for the first time. I won't feel proud when fighting against you because you're too weak, Li Daochong replied calmly. As he spoke, Li Daochong took out a talisman. It was the talisman he made before entering the spatial rift to protect himself. Li Daochong didn't know how powerful his first creation was. It was time to see its effects. Li Daochong already had a rough understanding of the Fist of Rupturing's power. Naturally, he wanted to test it out. Too weak? Kid, you'll pay for your arrogance with your life. My second form can take a hit from a Yuaniing cultivator, the Blood Ape King said proudly with anger. Really? Are all the Yuaniing cultivators you met crippled? Li Daochong didn't care. Contempt, complete contempt. The Blood Ape King was so angry that he almost vomited blood. He roared, "I'm going to kill you." He shot out like a cannonball. Boom! His speed instantly broke through 10 times the speed of sound. Even the space shook and exploded. Li Daochong shook his hand, and a level 10 talisman flew out. Boom! A mushroom cloud with a diameter of over 100 meters shot up into the sky. Half of the sky was dyed red by the raging flames. Everything within a few kilometers was set ablaze. The power of the explosion was extremely terrifying. Li Daochong slid back a few hundred meters to avoid the center of the explosion. The level 10 talisman seemed to have entered a completely different level. Its power was beyond imagination. It was even more powerful than the simple level 10 talisman that Li Daochong had obtained from Wenwan for the first time. An enhanced level 10 talisman. The Blood Ape King's attack seemed insignificant in the face of the level 10 talisman's explosion. The blood-red ape was sent flying, and its fur was set ablaze. Little Chong, didn't you say to pluck the monkey's fur? Why did you change to burning it? Li Tianyang's voice came from behind Li Daochong. He seemed to be a little dissatisfied. I plucked a bunch just now. The monkey smell is too strong. Let's burn it. Li Daochong replied. Hu Linger heard the conversation between the father and son and blushed with shame. Did they really think the Blood Ape King was a monkey? Chapter 396. The Blood Ape King's long hair was instantly burnt to ashes. The flame of a level 10 talisman had reached the level of Yang fire. It was fatal to any living creature. The Blood Ape King released his demonic aura with all his might and barely managed to extinguish the fire. He looked rather pathetic. His blood-red long hair had already been burnt to ashes, as if he had just crawled out from a pile of charcoal. His skin was also burnt. You. The Blood Ape King glared at Li Daochong, so angry that he could not speak. Li Daochong was very satisfied with the power of his first level 10 talisman. He estimated that it could kill a mid-stage Jin Dan cultivator and pose a greater threat to a late-stage Jin Dan cultivator. As for a peak Jin Dan cultivator, the level 10 talisman could not cause fatal damage to him, but it could still hurt him. The Blood Ape King only suffered superficial burns after taking the level 10 talisman head-on. Demons were indeed physically strong. If a peak Jin Dan cultivator were to take it head-on, he would not be able to take it. The Blood Ape King was furious. He was the leader of the Blood Knife Society, but he was being played around by a brat who had just entered the Jin Dan stage. I want you dead, the Blood Ape King roared. Demonic aura surged out of his body. After taking the level 10 talisman head-on, the Blood Ape King could still release such a strong aura. Even Li Daochong was impressed by his resistance. Of course, this was also because Li Daochong did not have a matching weapon. If Tsang Ink was a mystical spiritual treasure, the Blood Ape King would have been a pile of flesh and blood by now. The Blood Ape King seemed to have lost his mind. His bestial nature was completely triggered. He charged towards Li Daochong like a ferocious beast. An invisible force pierced through the void and shot towards the Blood Ape King. The Blood Ape King, who had just charged towards Li Daochong, suddenly stopped. A whirlpool appeared in his furious eyes. This strange scene caused the cultivators watching from afar to be baffled. He wondered what Li Daochong had done to the Blood Ape King. Li Daochong's current psyche power was not only boundless and profound, it was terrifyingly strong, and it was also silent. Even Jin Dan cultivators could not detect it. Of everyone present, only Hu Ling sensed it. Hu Ling-er's expression became more and more painful. She let out a soft groan and hurriedly cut off the psychic power that was controlling the Blood Ape King. Almost at the same time, Li Daochong turned to look at Hu Ling, and their gazes met. Thud! The charcoal-like blood ape king fell on its back, no longer breathing. Has he always been under your control? Li Daochong asked. It can't be considered as controlling. It's just affecting some of his consciousness. I'm not deliberately controlling anything, Hu Ling calmly replied. Then I have to thank you. If you hadn't affected his consciousness and made his soul unstable, my psyche power attack would have been able to kill him in one blow. Otherwise, I wouldn't have been able to hurt him, Li Daochong said with a smile. After Li Daochong released his psyche power attack, he immediately sensed the situation in the blood ape king's soul. He had actually pierced through the psyche power defense of a peak Jin Dan cultivator so easily. This was a little too easy, but soon, Li Daochong sensed another psyche power thread hidden in the blood ape king's soul. However, when he sensed it, the psyche power thread immediately retracted. It was also at that moment that Li Daochong discovered Hu Ling. Hu Ling looked at Li Daochong with interest as she replied, Little brother, you're making fun of me. Why do you need my help? With your ability, killing the blood ape king would be a piece of cake. You've been toying with him from the beginning. Am I right? I've already used my full strength. You overestimate me. However, you seem to be stronger than him, even though your cultivation is only at the mid-Jin Dan stage. Li Daochong suddenly smiled, and there was a strange look in his eyes. He clenched his fists as if he was about to start a fight. Hu Ling sensed danger and quickly retreated. Little brother, you're strong. I won't fight with you. Can you let me go? I can't. Li Daochong's answer was very straightforward. Hu Ling was already prepared to escape at any time. Therefore, when Li Daochong showed that he was about to fight, she immediately activated the divine wind shoes on her feet. Coupled with her flying technique, she was as fast as lightning, even faster than the blood ape king. However, Hu Ling only flew a few hundred meters before Li Daochong appeared behind her and punched. Hu Ling's beautiful face revealed a look of shock. What kind of speed was this? In a hurry, Hu Ling raised her hand to block. She was wearing white silk gloves. Bang! With a muffled sound, the huge fist hit Hu Ling's hand. Even though she was wearing soft silver gloves, she still felt the bones in her hand shatter. Hu Ling used the rebound force to increase her speed. Little brother, can you let me go? As Hu Ling flew, her eyes suddenly emitted a strange light as she looked at Li Daochong. Hypnosis? Li Daochong smiled. It's useless against me. Almost at the same time, blue-gold lightning flashed in Li Daochong's eyes. He was about to use Heavenly Thunder Art, Eye of Thunder Punishment. Hu Ling turned pale with fright and suddenly stopped. I won't run. Little brother, please stop. Just as she spat out the 8 characters, Li Daochong crashed into Hu Ling's chest. Li Daochong didn't expect this demon fox to suddenly stop. He didn't have time to stop and crashed into Hu Ling. Hu Ling took the opportunity to hug Li Daochong. She purposely gasped and leaned into Li Daochong's arms. By the time Li Daochong reacted, Hu Ling was already in his arms. The soft touch made his heart beat faster. This demon fox was really a disaster. Li Daochong's willpower was strong enough, but his mind was still unstable. No wonder the blood ape king fell for it. Little brother, I won't run. You can do whatever you want. Hu Ling fell into Li Daochong's arms and put on a look of being at his mercy. Li Daochong's eyes flashed with blue-gold light. His mind immediately returned to normal. He grabbed Hu Ling's hand and flew back. The Blood Knife Society's cultivators who were watching from afar saw the Blood Ape King fall and Hu Ling being chased. They didn't have the heart to stay any longer and scattered in all directions. Li Daochong put Hu Ling down. If you run, I'll kill you. After saying this, he broke through the air. Hu Ling curled her lips and bit her lower lip. You don't know how to be gentle with women. Li Daochong naturally didn't hear Hu Ling's complaints. In an instant, he captured all the Blood Knife Society's cultivators who had scattered in all directions. In just a few minutes, the 9 Blood Knife Society's cultivators who were still alive were all captured, including Cha Deli. The 9 Blood Knife Society's cultivators didn't dare to resist. They all knelt on the ground and trembled. Li Daochong glanced at them and said, "I just said that the Blood Knife Society shouldn't go anywhere and should stay in Blue Bay Star. Didn't you hear me? Exalted Immortal, please spare our lives." The 9 people said in unison. Cha Deli buried his head deep in the ground. His eyes kept rolling. He had just killed several Blue Bay Stars cultivators. It would be hard to let him go. Suddenly, Cha Deli threw out several talismans and turned into a lion. He ran toward the Blue Bay Stars cultivators. He wanted to take hostages. The talismans didn't explode at all. They were annihilated by the lightning in Li Daochong's eyes. Cha Deli's speed was extremely fast after he transformed. However, he stopped in place after just 2 steps. A spiral vortex appeared in his eyes. He fell to the ground with a thud. Just like the Blood Ape King, he didn't make a sound. Only his abdomen was moving up and down, indicating that Cha Deli was still alive. The strange thing was that he didn't transform back into his human form. Instead, he maintained his lion form. The remaining 8 members of the Blood Knife Society were even more frightened. Cha Deli was the strongest person in the Blood Knife Society apart from the 3 elders. However, he was like a chicken in front of this young man. He could be killed with a snap of his fingers. They didn't even know how this young man did it. The 8 people couldn't help but tremble. They felt that they were going to die. From today onwards, the Blood Knife Society will be dissolved. The society will belong to the Leaf family. Li Daochong looked at the 8 people and said word by word. The 8 people didn't dare to say no. The fate of the Blood Knife Society's president, the Blood Ape King, was unknown. Of the 3 elders, apart from Hu Ling, the other 2 were dead. Granny Blood Demon's life tablet was the first to shatter. The rhinoceros monster was killed by Li Daochong before Li Daochong fought the Blood Ape King. He died the fastest and didn't suffer much pain. Of the 3 hall masters of the law enforcement hall, Sha Mo was tied up with a hemp rope. His body was char-black. He died the most unjustly. Because he was the closest, he was shaken by the aftermath of the battle between the Blood Ape King and Li Daochong. He was already half-crippled. When the level 10 talisman exploded, he was in the center. He was directly burned into charcoal. He couldn't be more dead. Right after Cha Deli fell, the other hall master of the law enforcement hall, Quinn, was captured by Li Tianyong. The only remaining core member of the Blood Knife Society was Hu Ling. However, she seemed to have been captured as well. Chapter 397. When Li Daochong went to capture Hu Ling, Cha Deli gave the Blood Knife warship the highest order to destroy Tianyuan City. Fang Jia was the highest commander of the remaining people on the Blood Knife warship and the head of the Blood Knife Society's Blood Knife Hall. Fang Jia was dumbfounded when he received the news. He didn't know what to do, but in the end, he clenched his teeth and gave the order to attack. All the doors of the Blood Knife warship opened and hundreds of miniature armed shuttles flew out. The total military strength of the Blood Knife Society was equivalent to a regiment of the Cultivation Army, and it was a regiment of the regular army. The overall strength of the Blood Knife Society was still very strong. This force was destructive to the Blue Bay Star. There was no way to resist it. Although the local army of the Blue Bay Star was not small, with an entire division, they were very weak. The average combat strength of the soldiers was only at the 7th level of the Qi refinement realm. The regimental officers were only at the middle stage of the Qi condensation realm, and the highest commander was at the foundation establishment realm. They lived like princes and didn't have any real combat experience. When the soldiers saw the miniature armed shuttles of the Blood Knife Society, they were so scared that their legs went weak, let alone fight. LV Zeng, who was stationed in Tianyuan City, felt his heart rise to his throat when he heard the explosion in the distance and the ground shake. Who on earth dared to resist the Blood Knife Society and cause such a fierce battle to break out? LV Zeng racked his brains, but couldn't think of any force on the Blue Bay Star that could go against the Blood Knife Society. Was it a one-sided massacre by the Blood Knife Society? This was the only possibility LV Zeng could think of. Otherwise, no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't think of any other possibility. In fact, during this time, the local army of the entire Blue Bay Star was mobilizing their forces. The highest commander, Gu Jialuo, gave the highest order. Thousands of armed shuttles were lying in ambush outside Tianyuan City. The local army's duty was to protect the Blue Bay Star. Gu Jialua tried to send a message several times, but he couldn't. The entire Blue Bay Star was enveloped by an invisible magnetic field. The spirit magnetic equipment on the Blood Knife warship was far more advanced than the ones on the Blue Bay Star. "Commander, the Blood Knife Society has begun their operation." A young man dressed as an officer quickly ran over to report. Gu Jialua's face was gloomy and blue veins were popping out on his forehead. After becoming the supreme commander of the Blue Bay Star local army, his days had been pretty good and comfortable. Today, the Blood Knife Society had suddenly mobilized a large number of people to come here because someone had killed 4 of their subordinates on Blue Bay Star. Which idiot was it that provoked the Blood Knife Society? It's fine if you want to die, but why did you have to drag Blue Bay Star down with you? The fierce battle in the slums of the western suburbs of Tianyuan City made Gu Jinlua's heart tremble. How did this guy provoke the Blood Knife Society to make them so angry? Even Gu Jialua didn't dare to imagine what kind of existence could create such a commotion. The energy fluctuations detected by the spirit detector had already reached a critical point. The unmanned flying shuttles sent out in the air returned with even more shocking information. The slums no longer existed. "Commander, what should we do?" The officer was at a loss. "What else can we do?" "Retreat." Gu Jialua issued the order. The officer hesitated. "What? Do you think our army can defeat the Blood Knife Society?" Gu Jialua glared at him. Boom! As soon as Gu Jialua's voice fell, a loud noise came from outside. A beam of spiritual light shot over and destroyed a flying shuttle next to the command ship. The Blood Knife Society's miniature armed shuttles had already arrived. It's over. Gu Jialua sat down on a chair in a daze. He felt that his life was going to end here today. Gu Jialua didn't expect that a mere Blue Bay Star would encounter such a situation. Flames also rose in Tianyuan City. The Blood Knife Society really started to bombard Tianyuan City. On the other side, LV Zhang's situation was even worse. Fang Jie led a group of Blood Knife Society's Foundation establishment cultivators out of the armed shuttles and attacked LV Zhang's garrison first. Half of the soldiers were killed in the blink of an eye. They couldn't resist at all. In Tianyuan City, cries and screams were heard one after another. The people didn't know what was going on. They were suddenly attacked crazily, as if the end of the world had come. Ying Ping and Li Qingyao didn't go far after escaping. Instead, they stopped a shuttle parking lot on the top of a building in Tianyuan City, more than 10 kilometers away. Li Qingyao used the spiritual light telescope to observe the battle in the distance. When they saw the Blood Ape King fall on his back, the 2 girls hugged each other excitedly. Then, Li Qingyao started the shuttle and flew in the direction of the old house that had been razed to the ground. But after flying for a short while, the scene around them changed. Several miniature armed shuttles suddenly appeared and started to attack the shuttles passing by. They also threw down spiritual bombs from time to time. In an instant, the brightly lit streets were turned into a sea of fire. The shuttles flying back and forth were in a mess. Some crashed, and most of them were shot down by the armed shuttles. In her panic, Li Qingyao couldn't avoid being hit by a flying shuttle that was in a mess. She staggered for a while and was targeted by an armed shuttle. Fortunately, Li Qingyao's shuttle had been modified and had a certain level of defense. It was hit by the spiritual light gun twice and was blocked by the protective shield. But the third time, it wasn't so lucky. It hit the engine directly. The shuttle lost control and fell from a height of hundreds of meters. The 2 girls' minds went blank. If they fell from such a height, they would be smashed into meat paste instantly. The shuttle would also be smashed. When they were dozens of meters from the ground, the 2 girls hugged each other tightly and closed their eyes, waiting for the arrival of death. A few seconds later, the 2 girls found that they were still hugging each other and feeling each other's body temperature. The expected explosion and flames didn't appear. They didn't feel any pain either. The 2 girls slowly opened their eyes and were surprised to find that the completely malfunctioning shuttle had stopped in the air for some reason. Outside the window, A familiar face was looking at them with a smile. Young master, brother. The two girls spoke at the same time. Li Daochong had been dividing a trace of his psychic power on Silver Bottle and Li Qingyao. As long as the two girls were in danger, he would sense it. The two girls came out of the shuttle. Their small faces were still pale. The thrilling scene just now hadn't completely disappeared from their minds. Behind Li Daochong, dozens of cultivators from the three great clans of Blue Bay lined up neatly and respectfully followed Li Daochong. Li Daochong turned to Orson and said, "I'll leave the two of them to you. When I come back, if they lose a single hair, I'll throw you into the Blue Bay Strait to feed the fish." Orson glared and said, "Why are you giving them to me? I'm going to start a massacre. Just arrange for others to protect them." Li Daochong grinned. "I don't trust others." Orson was stunned. He curled his lips and held his head with both hands. "All right, since you said so, I'll take it." Li Daochong nodded slightly and then said to the others, "For your Blue Bay star, kill them." After saying that, Li Daochong soared into the sky. A ray of light flashed, and the three-armed shuttles in the air were instantly destroyed. The rest of the people scattered and flew in all directions of Tianyuan City. The weakest of these cultivators was at the early stage of Foundation Establishment realm. The three Jindan old ancestors didn't have much resistance against the Blood Ape King and the others. But in the end, they were Jindan cultivators and were more than enough to deal with this level of armed shuttles. Li Tianyang had a long spear in his hand. Even if he had internal injuries, he was still brave and fearless. Wherever he passed, the armed shuttles were pierced and exploded. The 8 cultivators of the Blood Knife Society, who were completely shocked by Li Daochong's strength, became the main force to clean up the armed shuttles. As a precaution, Li Daochong placed psychokinesis restrictions on all 8 of them. If they dared to betray him, he could kill them with a flick of his finger. More than half of the Blood Knife Society's armed shuttles were destroyed in just a few minutes. The remaining shuttles saw that the situation was not good and turned around to fly back to the Blood Knife warship. LV Zheng resisted desperately, but couldn't take a single move from Fang Jie. The difference in strength was too big. Just when LV Zheng thought that he was going to die, a ray of light flashed in the air. Fang Jie and the others were shocked at first. Fang Jie's expression changed greatly. "Who is it?" There was no response. A giant fist shadow fell from the sky. Fang Jie was shocked and raised his weapon to block. Boom! The giant fist fell, and not even a trace of Fang Jie was left. The surrounding cultivators of the Blood Knife Society were all killed. LV Zheng looked at the scene in front of him with a dumbfounded expression. His brain couldn't react. A young man in green clothes soared into the sky, followed by several lightning bolts. The surrounding cultivators of the Blood Knife Society were all killed. The young man in green flew into the sky. LV Zheng looked at the sky in a daze, his whole body a little dazed. After a while, an explosion sounded in the distance. The Blood Knife armed shuttle, which had landed majestically in the center of Tianyuan port, kept exploding from the inside out. Half an hour later, the rioting members of the Blood Knife Society were all killed. The local army began to clean up the mess. The spirit energy field surrounding the Blue Bay star disappeared, and the news could finally be sent out. Soon, the news of the Blood Knife Society's destruction after invading the Blue Bay star spread throughout the Federation. The news of the Blood Ape King's death spread like a heavy bomb among the upper-level cultivators of the Shenghua Federation. The last time a peak cultivator of Jindan died was more than 30 years ago on the frontline battlefield. Since the Hades' offensive weakened, it had been more than 30 years since a peak cultivator of Jindan died in battle. The Blue Bay Star became the focus of attention for a while, but no one knew who killed the Blood Ape King. Many reporters rushed to the Blue Bay Star as soon as possible, but they didn't get any information. But when they arrived at the site of the battle, they were all shocked by the scene in front of them. Tianyuan City, a super city, was reduced to ashes in this battle. After finishing off the Blood Knife Society that night, Li Daochong returned to the Li family for the first time in more than a year. His old house was destroyed, so he could only return to the Li family. The Li family looked at Li Daochong as if they were looking at a god. This silly boy, who had been kicked out of the Li family more than a year ago, not only saved the Li family, he also saved the Blue Bay Star, reaching the Jean Dan stage before the age of 20. Everyone in the Li family sighed. It was said that 30 years in the East and 30 years in the West, but it still took 30 years. It had only been a little more than a year, and Li Daochong had undergone earth-shattering changes. Li Daochong knew that the people who had kicked him and his father out had all been exiled, so he naturally didn't have a knot in his heart. After all, the Li family was Li Daochong's roots. They were his relatives who had given birth and raised him, so he couldn't bear to part with them. After returning to the Li family, Li Daochong immediately treated Li Tianyang's injuries. In one night, he healed 70 to 80% of the latter's injuries, and the rest would be healed after a few days of rest. Chapter 398. The Blood Ape King and Cha Deli's soul consciousness were killed by Li Daochong's telekinesis and disappeared into nothingness. However, the hairless blood ape and the golden lion didn't die. They just completely turned into demonic beasts and lost their intelligence. As long as the hairless blood ape and the golden lion saw Li Daochong, they would immediately tremble and crawl on the ground in fear. It was fear that came from the depths of their souls. The two demonic beasts' strength was comparable to a Jean Dan cultivator. Although the hairless blood ape didn't have the Blood Ape King's moves, it still had its strong physical body and Yao core. Just its physical body alone was comparable to a mid-stage Jean Dan cultivator. The golden lion had the strength of an early-stage Jean Dan cultivator. The two demonic beasts were also very strange. Although they were very afraid of Li Daochong, they were very close to Yin Ping. Perhaps one night, after the two demonic beasts were brought to the Li family and locked up in the dungeon, Yin Ping couldn't bear to see them covered in wounds. She secretly brought some healing liquid and applied it on the two demonic beasts who were tied up. The next day, when Li Daochong came over, Yin Ping was still protecting the two demonic beasts. The little girl's friendliness and kindness made the two demonic beasts somewhat dependent on her. Li Daochong, who originally wanted to bring the two demonic beasts along, changed his mind because of this. He placed a telekinesis restriction on the hairless blood ape and the golden lion. As long as they had any thoughts of betrayal, Li Daochong would kill them without hesitation. With these two demonic beasts, Li Daochong could leave with a little more peace of mind. Under Huling Er's control, the Blood Knife Society's assets were all transferred to the Li family. The following matters and management were naturally handed over to Li Tianyang. Li Daochong welcomed an important guest who secretly came to visit, Wei Beitong. Li Daochong already knew about Wei Beitong's visit from Tsang Jiao. In fact, Wei Beitong had already arrived at the Blue Bay Star when the Blood Ape King and Li Daochong were fighting. Tsang Jiao informed Wei Ziying as soon as she spoke with Old Devil Zhang. Wei Ziying, who had established a battle partnership with Li Daochong during the 100 Schools Alliance exam, immediately dragged Wei Beitong to spend a large sum of money to activate the teleportation formation on planet Kangwu and directly teleported to planet Crimson Sunday. It was the same teleportation array that Li Daochong had used to leave planet Scarlet Sun for planet Kangwu to participate in the joint examination of 100 schools. This was the fastest way to travel, but it consumed an astonishing amount of resources. The cost of teleporting from Kangwu Star to Scarlet Sun Star was 300,000 elementary spirit stones per person. The Kangwu Star didn't have a teleportation array that could teleport directly to the Blue Bay Star. One would have to go to the Crimson Sun Star for a transfer and then use a small teleportation array there to teleport to the Blue Bay Star. There was only one small teleportation array in the entire Blue Bay Star, and it could only teleport to the Red Sun Star. Wei Beitong had always wanted to meet Li Daochong, but he hadn't been able to. In the end, he hadn't been able to meet him on planet Kangwu due to various reasons. As the only one-star alchemist in the Federation, Wei Beitong's status didn't need to be mentioned. He was someone who could reach the core of the Federation. Wei Beitong had been obsessed with alchemy all his life. The pure white dew pill that Wei Ziying had obtained was fake, but it was real that her injuries had been healed. Therefore, Wei Beitong guessed that Li Daocheng knew how to use ancient medical techniques. This was the main reason why he wanted to meet Li Daocheng. Ancient medical techniques had been lost for a long time and were rarely mentioned by people nowadays. However, Wei Beitong had been refining medicine for many years and had read all kinds of ancient books. Coupled with his own understanding, he was deeply aware of the wonders of ancient medical techniques. If one could heal a person's injuries without using any spirit medicine, how mysterious would that be? Although the cultivators of the ancient times were uncivilized, they also had their own unique aspects that modern cultivators couldn't compare to. When Wei Beitong heard that the Blood Knife Society wanted to kill Li Daocheng, he naturally didn't agree. Due to the urgency of the situation, he didn't use the power of his family or the Shadow Serene Square. He directly teleported himself and his granddaughter to Blue Bay Star twice. Wei Beitong and Wei Ziying used the fastest speed they could to reach Blue Bay Star. When they arrived at Tianyuan City, they happened to see the scene where Li Daocheng saved Li Tianyang. That round of Tsang Ying's blade aura had left a deep impression on Wei Beitong. Wei Ziying stood on Tianyuan Mountain with her mouth agape. After all, a month ago, Li Daocheng was on par with her, or even slightly inferior. Only a month had passed, but Li Daocheng was already able to go head-to-head with Jin Dan cultivators without being at a disadvantage. Wei Ziying felt that her worldview was being turned upside down. She couldn't imagine that a person's cultivation speed could be so fast. Furthermore, Li Daocheng had already stepped into Jin Dan. Standing on the mountain peak, Wei Beitong shook his head and smiled bitterly. Ziying, why are we in such a hurry? He doesn't need our help at all. Wei Ziying nodded woodenly. Her beautiful eyes were wide open as she watched Li Daocheng fighting the Blood Ape King at the foot of the mountain. Wei Beitong had always thought that Li Daocheng was just an ordinary genius who had some fortuitous encounter that allowed him to inherit ancient medical skills. He didn't think that Li Daocheng's strength would be so perverse. Even the Blood Ape King was killed by him. Furthermore, throughout the entire battle, the Blood Ape King was basically suppressed by Li Daocheng. What did this kid eat to grow up? Wei Beitong couldn't understand. Could it be that there was some secret cultivation method in the ancient medical skills? Wei Beitong racked his brains and could only think of this possibility. After witnessing Li Daocheng's strength, the grandfather and grandson duo didn't make a move. He didn't need their help at all. Even if they did, they wouldn't be grateful. There was no need to add icing on the cake. The grandfather and grandson duo stood on Tianyuan Mountain and watched as Li Daocheng single-handedly destroyed the Blood Knife Society, one of the Shadow Serene Mill's main opponents. The Wei clan was the true controller of the Shadow Serene Mill. Wei Beitong was the head of the Wei clan. The Shadow Serene Mill and the Blood Knife Society had been fighting openly and secretly for many years. The reason the Wei clan had been holding back was because they didn't want to destroy the Blood Knife Society. After all, it would be useful in the battle against the Hades. Li Daocheng didn't care so much. If the other party wanted to kill him, he couldn't possibly stretch out his neck to kill them. He would definitely kill them instead. The next day, Wei Beitong officially visited Li Daocheng. This cultivator from Yuanying didn't put on any airs when he saw Li Daocheng. He directly addressed him as an equal, which stunned Wei Ziying. She knew that her grandfather valued Li Daocheng's ancient medical skills. She thought that her grandfather wanted to rope this kid into the Shadow Serene Mill or would help her refine medicine. She didn't expect that it would be to this extent. The Wei clan was an influential super clan in the entire Federation. Wei Beitong was even more important. He was a one-star alchemist. If the Wei clan shook, the Federation's fourth ring star zone would shake. Although the Wei clan's main power was in the fourth ring star zone, because of Wei Beitong, their clan was more powerful than the super clans or cultivation companies in the third ring star zone. With such an alchemist in charge, even if the Wei clan didn't have any geniuses, they could rely on Wei Beitong's elixirs to produce a few geniuses. Not to mention that the Wei clan already had geniuses. With the help of elixirs, there would be 2 or 3 dazzling stars in every generation. However, There weren't many Yuan cultivators in the Wei clan. There were only 3 of them. One of them was Wei Beitong. The other 2 were in seclusion all year round and hadn't appeared for decades. The 2 were the ancestors of the Wei clan. One of them was a mid-stage Yuan, and the other was a late-stage Yuan. They were old monsters who had lived for hundreds of years. They lived longer than the average Yuan cultivator and had a deeper cultivation. This was all thanks to Wei Beitong. Wei Beitong was the same. He was only a mid-stage Yuan cultivator, but he was known as the oldest Yuan cultivator in the Federation. He had lived for more than 500 years. Wei Xing was born 40 years ago when Wei Beitong was traveling around the world. He met an ordinary woman in the Ankuan Empire. He fell in love with her and brought her back to the Federation. Not long after, she gave birth to a son, who was Wei Xing's father. Therefore, although Wei Xing was young, her seniority in the Wei clan was quite high. Her seniority was similar to that of the elders. Even the oldest elder in the Wei clan had to call Wei Beitong ancestral patriarch. Therefore, one could see how prestigious Wei Beitong's status was. When Wei Beitong saw Li Daochong and called him Mr. Li, Wei Xing was stunned. Even if the planet leader of the Kangwu planet, Huaiyang perfected cultivator, was here, he would have to bow to her grandpa and call him senior. Grandpa called Li Daochong Mr. Li. Didn't that mean that Li Daochong was in the same generation as him? A 19-year-old kid? How was that possible? Wei Xing couldn't understand why her grandpa valued Li Daochong so much. Wasn't it a little too much? Even if this kid was shockingly talented and entered the Jin Dan stage at 19, it wasn't unprecedented. In the history of the Federation, there were only 5 people who entered the Jin Dan stage before the age of 20. But all 5 of them had a common problem, which was that they didn't have enough stamina. 4 of them didn't enter the Yuanying stage. Only one of them eventually hatched the Yuanying from the Jin Dan stage, but he stopped there and didn't take another step forward. Success at an early age wasn't necessarily a good thing. On the contrary, it was easy to become impatient. The current number 1 person in the Federation's divine protector, Lord Shengluo, walked the opposite path. When he was young, he didn't stand out at all. He didn't even enter the top 50 of the 100 schools examination and only entered a very ordinary cultivation school. After that, he studied step by step. Later, he joined the army for a period of time. Although he occasionally made contributions, there weren't any shocking achievements. It was just that he had shown some talent that surpassed his peers. After that, he traveled the world. After 10 years, he returned and went into seclusion. When he came out, he entered the Yuanying stage. From then on, his cultivation speed became faster and faster. After accumulating a lot, he reached the soul formation stage in 100 years and became one of the Federation's marshals. Then, after 50 years, he became the only late soul formation stage perfected lord in the Federation in 1,000 years and was given the title of Divine Protector. The number of soul formation stage perfected lords in the entire Federation could be counted on one hand. Therefore, looking at history, geniuses weren't necessarily geniuses. They were just more conspicuous at the beginning. The path of cultivation was long and difficult to say what would happen in the future. Wei Xing couldn't understand why her grandpa valued Li Daochong so much. Mr. Li, I just want to ask, do you know ancient medicine? After a while of small talk, Wei Beitong suddenly narrowed his eyes and cut to the chase. Yes, Li Daochong replied without hesitation. Li Daochong had already guessed the reason for Wei Beitong's visit and his desire to see him. He must have found out that the spirit medicine he sold to Wei Xing was fake. At that time, Li Daochong didn't know who Wei Xing was, let alone that Wei Beitong was Wei Xing's grandpa. If he had known, Li Daochong wouldn't have sold fake medicine to Wei Xing. He would have found another way to treat her and sell it for money. The Wei family was the most powerful family in the Federation, so there was no way that fake medicine could escape their eyes. Mr. Li, you are very straightforward. I wonder if you can show it to me right now. I have been studying ancient medicine for many years, but I still can't understand it. I have always hoped that I could make a breakthrough. Wei Beitong said with great sincerity. Li Daochong nodded and glanced at the cage in Wei Xing's hands. Inside it was a sickly little monkey. Wei Beitong had come prepared. Li Daochong stretched out his hand, and the cage flew out of Wei Xing's hands and towards Li Daochong. Wei Beitong's eyes lit up. Mr. Li, if I'm not wrong, this is one of the qi channeling techniques, telekinesis. Telekinesis wasn't anything special. If a cultivator in the qi gathering realm practiced some high-level palm techniques, they could do it, not to mention foundation establishment cultivators and Jindan cultivators. However, telekinesis was a technique. The user used spiritual energy to form a field, and the effect was produced after using the technique. Li Daochong didn't use any technique, nor did he form a field. There was only a continuous flow of qi. It was as if the qi had turned into an invisible hand and reached out to grab something from a distance. The effect was the same, but the process was very different. Chapter 399. Li Daochong nodded and didn't explain. Li Daochong didn't know any ancient medical skills. In fact, he relied on the pure spiritual energy transformed by the blood upgrader. This spiritual energy could restore all vitality that needed to be restored and devour all yin, death, nether, and ghost qi. Li Daochong took out the little monkey in the cage and placed his hand on the monkey's head. He poured a stream of spiritual energy into it and quickly found the cause of the little monkey's illness. Wei Beitong stared at Li Daochong with his old eyes, hoping to find clues and see the characteristics and techniques of the technique used. However, Wei Beitong looked for a long time and came to the conclusion that Li Daochong didn't use any techniques at all. This little monkey had 2 major injuries on its body and a kind of debilitating disease. There was a very faint yin energy in its heart. It was this energy that sucked away the vitality of the little monkey, making it look sick. The injuries on the little monkey's body were caused by someone, and they hadn't been injured for more than a day. The illness was also caused by someone. Obviously, this little monkey was brought over by Wei Beitong to test Li Daochong. Li Daochong didn't mind showing off in front of Wei Beitong. He also wanted to see what his real purpose was. If Wei Beitong didn't have any evil intentions, it wouldn't be a bad thing to befriend him. Li Daochong knew that he was still too ruthless when he wiped out the Blood Knife Society this time. He almost wiped out the entire Blood Knife Society's strongest forces. The Blood Knife Society had been operating for so many years. Li Daochong didn't believe that it didn't have a few powerful allies. It was unknown if there were any complicated relationships among them. If there were some powerful people who came to make trouble for Li Daochong, it would be troublesome. Li Daochong wasn't afraid if he was alone. At worst, he could go directly to the front line and come out when he was promoted to yuanying. However, there was the Li family. There was Yin Ping, his father, Li Qingyao, and a group of friends. If they were implicated, Li Daochong wouldn't be able to take care of them. Putting these aside, it was also a problem whether the Federation would pursue the matter. After all, the Blood Knife Society was somewhat special. In addition to being a force to fight against the Hades, it was also established by the demon race. The demon race was a minority in the Federation. Over the years, the Federation attached great importance to the protection of the minority. However, Li Daochong still had a trump card in his hand. If the Federation really wanted to pursue the matter, he could only use this trump card. Taoist spirit, Taoist, he would help him. The promise of a nascent soul stage cultivator was naturally worth 1,000 gold and was extremely precious. Li Daochong didn't want to use it casually. If the Federation really wanted to pursue the matter, Li Daochong could only seek perfected spirit talisman's help. However, if they could form a good relationship with Wei Beitong, with the Wei clan's strength, they should be able to resolve this matter. A few minutes later, the eyes of the little monkey, who was on the verge of death, lit up and the long fur on its body became crystal clear. When Li Daochong released his hand, the little monkey jumped on the table for a while, waving its arms and legs at Li Daochong as if to thank him. Finally, it climbed onto Li Daochong's shoulder and sat down, looking like it wasn't going to leave. Beep discovered an immature shabi. It's a spirit beast that eats ghosts. It has a natural restraining effect on dark ghosts and a strong immunity to ghost techniques. It can ward off evil and suppress ghosts. When the little monkey sat on Li Daocheng's shoulder, the blood-boiling level-up device in his sea of consciousness suddenly issued a notification. Under normal circumstances, the blood-boiling level-up device would only have an intense reaction when it was close to dark ghosts. Apart from dark ghosts, Li Daocheng had to touch or consciously activate the blood-boiling level-up device before it would react. Otherwise, it wouldn't make a sound. Today, it was quite active. Shabby? Li Daocheng glanced at the little monkey on his shoulder. It didn't look like one. Wasn't a shabby a flying demonic ape? This little monkey had no wings, no fangs, and a short tail. At first glance, it was obvious that it was an ordinary mountain monkey. Its fur was waxy yellow, like withered grass, without any luster. Li Daocheng had injected so much spirit qi into the little monkey just now, but only made the little monkey's fur shine for a while before quickly returning to its original appearance. It was dirty and not likable at all. In short, this little monkey didn't have any characteristics of shabby, nor did it have the beast core unique to powerful spirit beasts. An old monster like Wei Beitong clearly couldn't tell, or he wouldn't have experimented on a shabby. The shabby was one of the 10 ancient divine beasts. If it could be raised in captivity, it could become a powerful combat partner in the future. Also, shabby were relatively close to people. Once it recognized a master, it would remain loyal until death. Although Li Daocheng couldn't tell which part of the little monkey looked like a shabby and suspected that this mixed fur monkey was a shabby, no matter how doubtful he was, his trust in the hot-blooded level-up device still prevailed. Li Daocheng naturally didn't show what he was thinking on his face. His expression was normal, and he just let the little monkey sit on his shoulder. It was quite the demeanor of a Taoist. Wei Beitong stared at the little monkey and scanned it with his telekinesis. This mixed fur mountain monkey, which should have died in a few days, was completely healed after Li Daocheng used his qi to heal it. Its internal problems were also gone. Wei Beitong was surprised by the speed of the treatment. He could also heal the little monkey, but it would take a certain amount of time. He had to refine a spirit medicine first, and then unblock the little monkey's meridians. However, Li Daocheng only needed to use his spirit qi to heal it, and the treatment was completed in a few minutes. Ancient medical skills were indeed magical. Wei Beitong couldn't hide the excitement on his face. The method of using qi could not only be used for treatment, but also for refining medicine. One could use qi to make medicine. In advance, one would inject the principles of qi into the spirit medicine and then seal it. After consuming the spirit medicine, the qi would automatically release and heal the body. Or one could use it on spirit talismans and control the spirit talismans to attack wherever it was directed. It could also be used on spirit arrays, Dharma treasures, weapons, and even the flying space shuttle. Mr. Li's qi treatment is really amazing, Wei Beitong said in amazement. At this moment, he no longer had the arrogance of a noble alchemist. He wanted nothing more than to worship Li Daocheng as his master. If it weren't for Wei Xing standing beside him, Wei Beitong really would have done so. Could it be that Li Daocheng had discovered some ancient ruins? Otherwise, how could he have such amazing abilities? Qi treatment, amazing cultivation speed, powerful strength, and even know how to make strengthening spirit talismans. For a moment, Wei Beitong had a trace of evil thoughts, but he quickly discarded them. Wei Beitong didn't believe that Li Daocheng didn't have any trump cards. Although he was a Yuanian cultivator, Li Daocheng already had the power of a peak Jindan cultivator and couldn't be underestimated. If he failed, he would provoke a powerful enemy. According to Li Daocheng's current growth speed, he estimated that if he failed, he would have to face a powerful enemy. In 2 or 3 years, he would reach the level of Yuanian cultivator, but his power would increase even more. By then, even the Wei family wouldn't be able to withstand Li Daocheng's wrath. The reason why Wei Beitong was able to live for so long was not only because of his alchemy skills, but also because he was able to suppress his greed. This was the main reason why Wei Beitong was able to live for so long. It's just a small trick, Elder Wei. Now that I've shown you the qi treatment, can you tell me why you're here? Li Daochong asked. Ha ha ha, of course, of course. I've always been interested in Mr. Li's qi treatment. Also, I want to thank Mr. Li for saving Xing, Wei Beitong said with a slightly embarrassed smile. You don't have to be so polite, Elder Wei. I paid you back then, so we don't owe each other anything. As for the qi treatment, if Elder Wei is interested, you can exchange it with something valuable, Li Daochong said slowly. Elder Wei's eyes lit up. At first, he thought that Li Daochong would refuse without hesitation. After all, this was an ancient secret technique. He didn't expect that he could exchange it. As long as he could exchange it, it would be easy. Wei Beitong was so poor that all he had was money. As an alchemist who had lived for so long, he had a lot of collections. Wei Beitong chuckled. Mr. Li, just tell me what you want. As long as it's something I can give, I won't be stingy. Li Daochong was not pretentious. He said directly, the qi treatment isn't something that can be learned in a day or two. Also, I need to personally channel my qi into your body so that you can feel it. Every time I do it, I'll have to exchange 10 items. Wei Beitong could feel it directly when he heard it. Wouldn't that mean that he could learn it very quickly? He could even exchange 100 items, let alone 10. Wouldn't he be able to learn it after experiencing it once or twice? I'm a Yuanine cultivator and an alchemist. My perception is more than 1,000 times better than that of ordinary people. This is a good deal. Wei Beitong immediately said, if Mr. Li is willing to do this, just tell me what you want. Although the Wei family isn't considered a top family in the Federation, no family dares to compete with us in terms of wealth. 10,000-year frost soul, 1,000-year fiery sungrass, mysterious nether jade, 9 strange gold root, etc. Whatever you want, just tell me. Li Daochong smiled. Elder Wei, I don't want any of these. They're useless to me. I want Yin-Yang tears, Xidagarba flower, true dragonhorn rong, 1,000-year divine beast blood, demon soul grass. Every time Li Daochong listed an item, a drop of sweat would appear on Wei Beitong's face. By the end of the list, the back of his head was soaked with sweat. Motherf asterisk cur. Wei Beitong screamed at his heart. Although these items weren't the most valuable things, and weren't as valuable as the items Wei Beitong had just listed, they were extremely difficult to obtain. Wei Beitong's 500 years of hard work had been accumulated in the Wei family's treasure vault. Out of the 10 items Li Daochong had listed, there were only 4. The main thing was that Wei Beitong usually didn't pay attention to these things. Otherwise, there wouldn't be only 4. Ahem. Wei Beitong had just bragged and was now a little embarrassed. He coughed a few times and said, Mr. Li, these things are very rare. To be honest, I only have 4 of them. But don't worry, I'll only need half a month to get all the other 6. Li Daochong nodded. Then in half a month, I'll go to the Wei family to get the items and then teach Elder Wei the qi circulation technique. How about that? Wei Beitong immediately nodded. Of course, of course. It's the Wei family's honor to be able to come. Seeing her grandfather praise Li Daochong so highly, as if implying that the Wei family couldn't compare to him, Wei Xing, who was standing on the side, became more and more confused. Although the estrangement between her and Li Daochong in the past had been resolved during the 100 schools joint examination, their relationship had improved. Wei Xing also admired Li Daochong's talent, but she only saw him as a good friend. Her good friend was suddenly treated as an equal by her grandfather and was even elevated to an unimaginable position. Wei Xing couldn't accept this. Even if Li Daochong had entered the Jindan realm at a young age, he shouldn't be valued so highly. At most, he would be treated as a guest of the Wei family. Chapter 400. Elder Wei, I think this mountain monkey is quite well behaved. It must be fate for us to meet each other in this way. Why don't you let it stay by my side? Li Daochong said calmly. Since Mr. likes it, then keep it. This mountain monkey was something I took from the cage in the Shadow Serene workshop. If not for that, It would have become food for the beasts in the underground Colosseum. To be able to be kept by Mr. is its great fortune, Wei Beitong said with a smile. Li Daochong could have just let the little monkey sit on his shoulder without saying a word. Even if Wei Beitong left, he probably wouldn't have said anything. He said this to test the waters. First, he wanted to see if Wei Beitong didn't know the origins of the little monkey. Second, he wanted Wei Beitong to agree to let the little monkey stay. That way, when the little monkey grew up, Wei Beitong wouldn't be able to say anything. There wouldn't be any grudges between them. However, if Wei Beitong had known that the little monkey was a shabi, he probably wouldn't have given it to Li Daochong. The shabi hadn't appeared in the Federation for thousands of years. This kind of divine beast was comparable to true dragons and true phoenixes. If one could establish a soul contract with it and make it their soul-bonded beast, it would become the most powerful combat partner. Moreover, the shabi was the most feared spirit beast of the Dark Ghost. From Wei Beitong's answer, it seemed that he had no idea what this little monkey was. However, this wasn't strange because Li Daochong hadn't seen any clues. If not for the hot-blooded upgrader, Li Daochong would have thought it was a very ordinary mountain monkey. It couldn't even be considered a spirit beast. After Wei Beitong said this, Li Daochong nodded slightly. The matter came to an end. From now on, the little monkey belonged to Li Daochong. The little monkey was quite well-behaved. First, it sat on Li Daochong's shoulder. Then, it simply lay down and slept. Only its big eyes would occasionally squint and shoot a few cold glances at Wei Beitong. It seemed that it was still holding a grudge against the old man for injuring it. If it weren't for the fact that it was still a child, it would have rushed up and torn this old man to shreds. However, Wei Beitong didn't notice it at all. He continued to chat with Li Daochong. After leaving the Li family, Wei Xing asked in confusion, "Grandpa, why are you so respectful to Li Daochong? You act like he's a soul formation perfected cultivator." Xing, that's because you don't know the wonders of chi manipulation. The ancient cultivators were more conservative, but they were more studious than modern cultivators. They were even willing to spend their entire lives researching a secret technique. Modern cultivators, on the other hand, are too impetuous and only look at immediate benefits. Many secret techniques have already been lost. Since Li Daochong was able to comprehend the chi manipulation technique, his future achievements will be limitless. Grandpa is also doing this so that the Wei family will have a strong support in the future. Now that the Federation is in turmoil, the Nether Realm seems to have recovered a lot of its vitality. I'm afraid that the Great Tribulation won't be too far away. Grandpa is old and can't support the Wei family forever. In the future, it will still depend on the younger generation. Is the chi manipulation technique really so miraculous? Wei Xing's eyes flashed with confusion. The so-called chi manipulation technique is the ability to freely control the spiritual energy in your body after releasing it outside your body. It's somewhat similar to telekinesis. It's like a second form of telekinesis. The difference is that telekinesis is an invisible field substance, while spiritual energy is an energy substance. The field substance can only be used for detection, or if it's condensed enough, it can be used to attack something similar to a field. However, it can't affect physical objects. For example, if you attack a person, telekinesis can only damage their mind and soul, but it can't cause any damage to their body. Similarly, if you can't hurt, you can't heal. Spiritual energy can't harm the mind, but it can harm the body. At the same time, it can also heal the body. Everything in the spirit world relies on spiritual energy. Without spiritual energy, everything will wither away. The ancient cultivators discovered this point, which was why they developed the miraculous chi manipulation technique. Wei Beitong very patiently explained to his most beloved granddaughter. Wei Xing didn't fully understand. Although she didn't fully understand, as long as it was her grandfather's words, she was sure that it was an amazing secret technique. It seemed that she had to redefine Li Daochong's importance. After sending off the Wei family's grandfather and granddaughter, Li Daochong immediately went to the room where Princess Catherine was imprisoned. After the battle, Li Daochong hadn't asked about this snake girl. When she saw Li Daochong, Princess Catherine couldn't help but tremble. After the Blood Ape King appeared, Princess Catherine thought that she was saved. Although Li Daochong had placed a restriction on her, Princess Catherine believed that the Blood Ape King could definitely remove it. However, even if Princess Catherine grew 100 heads, she would never have thought that the Blood Ape King wouldn't be a match for Li Daochong. This was too King-illogical. The Blood Ape King was a peak Jindan cultivator. The blood of the Blood Ape tribe flowed in his body. Previously, Princess Catherine only felt that Li Daochong was very strong, but not to the point where he was undefeatable. Now, looking at Li Daochong again, it was as if she was looking at an unshakable mountain. "Are you here to kill me?" Princess Catherine asked faintly. "No." Li Daochong took out some tools and replied simply. "Then are you here to punish me and teach me a lesson?" Princess Catherine was scared witless. "No, I'm here to take the poison," Li Daochong replied. "It's been less than a month since the last time." Princess Catherine felt relieved. "It's okay. Take as much as you can. It's best if you work harder on your cultivation. When you reach the Jindan stage, the amount of usnea poison you secrete every month should be a lot more." Li Daochong opened Princess Catherine's mouth as he spoke and placed a glass tube inside. Princess Catherine's cherry lips were extremely beautiful. One look at them, and one would have the urge to kiss them. However, when her cherry lips opened, two long and sharp fangs would be revealed. They were at least 1.5 inches long. If one was bitten by these two fangs, it would not be easy to break free. However, there were two extremely small holes at the tip of these two fangs. They were the size of needle tips. Once bitten, the poison would immediately be injected into the target's body. Of course, it could also be spat out under Princess Catherine's control. When Li Daochong was taking out the poison, he suddenly reached out and grabbed Princess Catherine's neck. The latter's relaxed heartstrings were suddenly pulled back. Her beautiful eyes looked at Li Daochong in disbelief. Princess Catherine wanted to shout, but she couldn't. She wanted to speak, but she couldn't. The hand that grabbed her neck was like an iron clamp. Princess Catherine's breathing became difficult. Her eyes were filled with fear, confusion, and shock as she looked at Li Daochong. It was as if she was saying, "Since you want to kill me, why did you lie to me?" Just when Princess Catherine was in despair, the hand on her neck did not increase its strength. It just firmly controlled her. Immediately after, a stream of spiritual energy poured into Princess Catherine's body. It rushed straight to the root of Princess Catherine's poison vein. Princess Catherine felt as if her body had been injected with a cardiac stimulant. She began to twist and was actually forced to transform. Not long after, she turned into a giant python. The poison sac that had not completely gathered began to swell and was soon filled to the brim. The usnea's poison flowed continuously from the fangs into the glass tube. The giant python that Princess Catherine had turned into became more and more dispirited. Its intense twisting became slower and slower. Princess Catherine felt as if her body had been hollowed out. She could no longer maintain her transformed state. Even under Li Daochong's stimulation, she was unable to transform. Little by little, she shrank and returned to her human form. The transformed Princess Catherine's clothes had long been torn apart. At this moment, her soft, snow-white body was paralyzed on the ground, gasping for breath. Li Daochong's hand loosened. He looked at the usnea's poison that had been collected in the glass tube with satisfaction. There was more than 30 milliliters. Princess Catherine, who was lying on the ground, was extremely weak. At this moment, even a mortal would be able to manipulate her at will. The snake woman's figure was graceful and charming. Her soul-stirring curves were more exciting than any art piece. Just a glance would be able to stimulate the lust of any male creature. In fact, even Li Daochong was no exception. However, those with powerful telekinesis could resist distracting thoughts. Li Daochong put away the glass tube and looked down at Princess Catherine, who was lying on the ground. He said indifferently, "I don't want to use this method of killing the goose that lays the golden eggs. It will damage your Yaodan. If you do it a few more times, your Yao Dan will shatter. At that time, you will be like the Blood Ape King and can only be a monster. If you sincerely submit to me, you will have many benefits in the future. If you have any thoughts of betraying me again, I will squeeze the essence of your Yao Dan dry in one go and extract enough poison so that you will forever be a big snake and be released into the wilderness. At that time, you will lose all your cultivation. Your soul will still be there, but you will not have any strength. You can imagine what will happen in the wilderness. Oh, right? I probably won't put you in the wilderness of the human territory. I think the Hades wilderness might be more suitable for you. Master, Princess Catherine won't dare to do it again. Princess Catherine crawled on the ground naked. Her round buttocks were raised high. Her body was slightly trembling. She no longer had any thoughts of betrayal. Chapter 401. After Li Daochong left the room where Princess Catherine was placed under house arrest, he immediately went to the underground city to see old Devil Zhang. The Tsang ink saber could no longer be used, so it had to be upgraded. The mysterious magic gold he brought back from the Dead Star also needed old Devil Zhang to appraise it. Half an hour later, in old Devil Zhang's personal refining room in the shadow secluded square, the old man was carefully examining the blue stone on the ground. Next to him was a table that had been crushed. This table was not made of wood, but of metal mixed with some silver. When Li Daochong took out the blue stone and placed it on top of the table that old Devil Zhang had used for more than 10 years immediately collapsed. Old Devil Zhang looked at the blue stone in amazement and used all kinds of instruments to examine it. Every time the results came out, old Devil Zhang's expression would be a little more surprised. Brotherly, if this old man is not wrong. This is a heavy silver age essence core that has been compressed for hundreds of thousands of years. Its weight is amazing, and such a small piece weighs thousands of pounds. The heavy silver age essence core itself is a mysterious magic gold, and the heavy silver age essence core is a high-level magic gold used to make mysterious spirit treasures. Even if it has been immersed in death chi for thousands of years, its characteristics will not change. This is a treasure that can only be found by chance. Even Yuanian cultivators may not have a mysterious spirit treasure. Old Devil Zhang explained with an expression of disbelief. Li Daochong took out the Tsang ink and handed it to Old Devil Zhang. Old Devil Zhang, can this Tsang ink be restored? Old Devil Zhang took the Tsang ink and looked at it, then said, it can be restored, but it will take some time. If this heavy silver age essence core can be added to it, it can reach the level of a mysterious spirit treasure without forming a weapon soul. Li Daochong was going to leave the Blue Bay Star tomorrow, so he naturally did not have that much time. He asked, how long will it take? Old Devil Zhang replied, Brother Li, to tell you the truth, even if my cultivation is restored, it will take half a month to melt the heavy silver age essence core. Right now, I can't meld it at all. Even if I can meld it with my ability, I can't make a mysterious spirit treasure, which is a field that only Yuanian cultivators can reach. Li Daochong showed a look of regret. Then he put the heavy silver age essence core away. Old Devil Zhang left. He was about to leave when Old Devil Zhang said, Brother Li, a mysterious spirit treasure is not something that a refiner can make. You are about to enter the North Star University. As one of the 4 famous schools in the Federation, the North Star University's refining department is not weak at all. Maybe you can ask the dean of the refining college to help you repair the Tsang ink. Kyle Yen, the dean of the North Star University's refining college, is a very famous master refiner in the Federation. With his help, your Tsang ink will definitely be a mysterious spirit treasure. Thank you for your advice, Old Devil Zhang. Li Daochong nodded. When he left, Li Daochong told Old Devil Zhang about the space crack under the Heavenly Palace Club and asked him to contact Song Jiao. When Li Daochong left the Dead Star, he released a GPS device. After several days of positioning, he had found the real location of the Dead Star in the 6-ring star field. After the location was determined, he could basically conclude that there would not be any powerful dark ghosts on the Dead Star. It was just a lost Dead Star. It was an accident that the king of Kukui had appeared on the dead star. It was not of much value to Li Daocheng. He might as well do old Devil Zhang a favor and let him cooperate with Sang Jiao to develop the dead star. It was nothing to Li Daocheng, but it was a super gift to old Devil Zhang and Sang Jiao. Before Li Daocheng left, he helped old Devil Zhang treat his internal injuries. Li Daocheng did not have the ability to treat them before, but now that he had entered the Jin Dan stage, helping old Devil Zhang was just a small matter. Old Devil Zhang had always thought that his internal injuries would never be healed. He did not expect Li Daocheng to treat them so quickly. Although old Devil Zhang's cultivation had not recovered immediately, there were no obstacles in the circulation of his internal spirit, and his internal injuries were completely healed. It would not be long before old Devil Zhang could return to Jin Dan. Old Devil Zhang could not repay these two big gifts. He immediately decided to leave the Blue Bay Star with Li Daocheng and go to the North Star University. Kai Lian and old Devil Zhang were comrades in arms. They were both military equipment refiners and had worked together for many years. After retiring from the army, the two walked different paths. One walked all the way to the dark and entered the shadow Serene Square, while the other walked all the way to the white and became a professor at a famous school. As for the space crack, after old Devil Zhang told Sang Jiao about it, this ambitious woman who wanted to climb to the top of the shadow Serene Square immediately used her authority to organize people to go to the Blue Bay Star. If they could develop a dead star, Sang Jiao would have made a great contribution and would definitely be of great value to the shadow Serene Square. However, this matter did not have much to do with Li Daocheng. Sang Jiao only needed to know that this was a big gift from him. There was also another important person, Huling Er. Li Daocheng did not know how to deal with her. Huling Er's cultivation was higher. This demon fox was a bit strange. Li Daocheng could not plant a restriction in her soul and control her. Huling Er took out a few valuable items in exchange for her freedom. Li Daocheng did not have much time and did not want to waste too much time on this demon fox. He took the items and let her go. Everything was settled. The next day, a young man, an old man, a mountain monkey, and a snake woman boarded the space shuttle and left the Blue Bay Star. Li Daocheng only took the little monkey and Princess Catherine with him. Originally, he wanted to take Yinping with him, but Li Daocheng gave up on the idea in the end. He felt that Yinping was still too young and her cultivation was too low. It would be more dangerous for her to follow him. Now, she had two powerful demon beasts protecting her. Her father, Li Tianyang, had recovered. There were also 8 original core members of the Blood Knife Society. 3 of them were at the early Jin Dan stage, and the other 5 were at the peak of the Foundation establishment stage. With such a protective force, there were very few forces in the 4-ring starfield that could shake them. As for the dark ghosts, even if a soul catcher ghost appeared in the Blue Bay Star, it would be very difficult to shake the Leaf family. Unless a large number of soul catcher ghosts appeared or Wu ghost-level dark ghosts appeared. Li Daocheng did not take a single cent of the wealth that he had quickly accumulated. He left it all for his father to control and use for future development. There was also a portion left for Yinping and Li Qingyao to cultivate. Before Li Daocheng left, he gave Yinping another big gift. Other than opening all of her spirit meridians, he also helped her cultivate her spirit roots. Li Daocheng also copied a copy of the psychokinesis battle technique and gave it to Yinping so that she could cultivate it. Yinping really wanted to leave with Li Daocheng, but she also knew that she would be a burden. She could only hold back her tears and watch as Li Daocheng boarded the space shuttle and flew away. One day later, Li Daocheng arrived at the Red Sun Star. There was still half a month before he had to report to North Star University. There were still some resources on the Red Sun Star that needed to be gathered. Of course, his 2 teachers were also here. Li Daocheng wanted to visit them. Li Daocheng originally planned to bring Li Tianyang and the others to the Red Sun Star to develop. However, plans cannot be changed. After the Blood Knife Society's assets were all transferred to the Li family, it would not be long before the Blue Bay Star became even more prosperous than the Red Sun Star. Seeing that his father seemed to have special feelings for the Blue Bay Star, Li Daochong gave up on the idea of moving the red sun star. In terms of position in the star field, the blue bay star was actually much better than the red sun star. It was just that the red sun star's development was better than the blue bay stars, which was why the red sun star was more prosperous while the blue bay star was more backward. From a mini dark ghost that appeared on a red sun star, it could be seen that the red sun star was closer to the edge of the fourth ring star. After arriving at the red sun star, Li Daochong immediately went to Beiyang University. This place had already become a branch of the North Star University. The expansion was in full swing. Qin Shanghai and Yung Byung-ha walked around the construction site every day and smiled from ear to ear. In a few months, this place would become a branch of the North Star University. However, Beiyang University was still independent. Its main task was to nurture talents to participate in the joint examination of 100 schools. It could not really become a supplement to the North Star University. In fact, North Star University was just investing in the construction of Beiyang University and assisting Beiyang University in its construction. Other than that, there was nothing else. When Beiyang University could develop in the future, North Star University would be its biggest shareholder. Seeing Li Daochong return, the two elders were happy. In the future, Li Daochong would be the signboard of Beiyang University. The greater his achievements in the future, the greater the reputation of Beiyang University would be. Famous people in famous schools were famous in famous schools. This had always been an important means of publicity and reliance for universities to recruit students and attract students. After Li Daochong settled old Ghost Zhang down, he took the little monkey and Princess Catherine to the Pure Gold Hotel. He brought the little monkey because this little thing could not leave Li Daochong. If he put it down, it would immediately run back and climb onto Li Daochong's shoulder. As for Princess Catherine, Li Daochong wanted to nurture her so that she could break through as soon as possible. The sooner she entered the Jin dance stage, the more usnia poison Li Daochong could obtain. The Pure Gold Hotel was the third Master Yin's nest. When Li Daochong stepped into the hotel, he happened to run into Sister Lan and was almost stopped by the guard again. When the guard saw Sister Lan's panicked expression in front of this unremarkable young man, his heart skipped a beat. Who was Sister Lan? She was the third Master Yin's woman, commonly known as the boss's woman. On the Red Sun planet, there were not many people who could make Sister Lan treat them with respect, not to mention the self-cultivators. The guard was secretly speechless. He was secretly glad that Sister Lan had appeared in time. Otherwise, he would have gotten himself into trouble. It was better to be more careful in the future. Otherwise, he would not even know if he had offended some big shot. Li Daochong went up to the top floor of the hotel under Sister Lan's warm greeting. The third Master Yin was not there. However, after Sister Lan told him the news, the third Master Yin, who was negotiating in the underground city, rushed to the hotel. The reason why the third Master Yin was able to make a name for himself on the Scarlet Sun planet was because of Mr. Li's reputation. In just a few months, the third Master Yin had become one of the underground leaders of the Red Sun planet. Before Li Daochong appeared, even with the support of the Yin family, the third Master Yin could only mingle in the metropolis where the Red Sun City was located. Even if he had infiltrated other places, it was very limited. His sphere of influence only covered a dozen cities. However, it was different now. The entire northern region of the Red Sun planet, including the Red Sun City, was the third Master Yin's territory. Everyone knew that the omnipotent Mr. Li was behind the Red Gold Gang. It seemed that some of the high-level self-cultivators on the Red Sun planet also knew of Mr. Li's name. It was said that a Jin Dan cultivator on the Red Sun planet praised Mr. Li. There were only a dozen or so Jin Dan cultivators on the Red Sun planet. To be able to get the support of a Jin Dan cultivator meant that the third Master Yin was one of the top cultivators on the Red Sun planet. This Jin Dan cultivator was by Yi, who had fought against the Ghost King with Li Daochong in the grotto. Without a golden core cultivator to oversee the operation, the Yin family cannot withstand the pressure from the other party. The third Master Yin paused for a moment before continuing, In the past month, we spent more than 3 million low-grade spirit stones on the 2 Gene Dan cultivators. Even though we've made a lot of money recently, we can't afford to spend so much. Masterly, can you give us some time? Once we've dealt with the problem here, I'll personally exchange 200,000 mid-grade spirit stones for Masterly. What do you think? Li Daochong frowned slightly. He didn't plan to stay on the Scarlet Sun planet for too long. He wanted to take the dividends and settle everything here. 200,000 mid-grade spirit stones was indeed a huge sum. Even for a big gang like the Pure Gold Gang, it wasn't easy for them to take it out. However, with Li Daochong's understanding of the third Master Yin and the family's strength, he could still take it out if he gritted his teeth. Li Daochong's price wasn't high. If it wasn't for him, the family would have been exterminated. The third Master Yin was able to take over the northern part of the Scarlet Sun planet because of Li Daochong. Just based on these two matters, it was definitely worth 200,000 mid-grade spirit stones. Li Daochong thought for a moment before saying, "You have so many properties, mines, and shares under your name. Just casually mortgage a few of them, and you'll be able to get 200,000 mid-grade spirit stones." The third Master Yin sighed and said, "Masterly, there's something you don't know. Right now, we've already mortgaged more than half of the properties under our name. We've gathered all of our wealth together to fight it out with the other powers. The family has been pressured very hard recently. If we don't succeed, we'll die trying." The chilling soul source crystal was discovered in the cave. That's a zenith mystery grade magic metal. The entire Scarlet Sun planet was shaken by it. All the high-level cultivators came out of their nests and waited outside the cave for the chilling soul source crystal to completely condense. Chilling soul source crystal. Li Daochong's eyes flashed. Not long ago, he heard old Devil Zhang mention this thing. When old Devil Zhang was chatting with Li Daochong on the way here, he said that it would be great if he could have a piece of chilling soul source crystal. If he fused it with the heavy silver age nucleus marrow, he would be able to bring out the properties of the two types of magic metal to the extreme. Song Ink could directly become a high-grade mystic comprehending true treasure. If the chilling soul source crystal's chilling soul was formed, after it was smelted, it would naturally form an artifact soul. Song Ink even had a slight chance of becoming a zenith mystery spirit treasure. Li Daochong immediately became interested. Just from the name of the chilling soul source crystal, it seemed very powerful. "Where's the cave?" "Bring me there," Li Daochong immediately asked. "Lord Li, although I have some power, it's limited to mortals. I can't interfere with the affairs of cultivators. At that level, the family doesn't need me to show up. They'll take care of it themselves. If you want to go, you can only contact young Master and he can arrange for you to go there. The cave has been cleaned up within a radius of 300 kilometers. Without permission, no one is allowed to enter. Only a few big families can enter with their family badges." Third Master Yin replied cautiously with a troubled expression. He was afraid that he would anger Master Li by rejecting him again and again. Third Master Yin's heart was filled with bitterness. Ever since he had met Master Li, he had rejected all of his requests. But Third Master Yin didn't want to. Lord Li's request was really beyond his ability. Even if he cut off his head, he couldn't do it. "You just need to tell me the location." Li Daochong was a bit impatient. Third Master Yin didn't dare to reject anymore. Even if he wanted to persuade Lord Li not to go, he didn't dare to say it. Third Master Yin tapped on his wristwatch, and a spiritual aura map appeared. He then pointed at an area and said, "Lord Li is here." Li Daochong narrowed his eyes when he saw it. His interest grew even stronger. The place Third Master Yin was pointing at was Shuangyuan Town, where the strange phenomenon had occurred. Originally, a spatial rift leading to the Hades had been about to open in the cave near Shuangyuan Town. Li Daochong had blocked the spatial rift with the help of the extreme Yin Compass and the Snow Lady. Li Daochong had gone there before taking the joint examination of 100 schools, worried that the spatial rift hadn't been blocked tightly enough. However, after investigating, he found that the spatial fluctuations had been completely stabilized and no spatial rifts would appear. Only then did Li Daochong feel at ease and take the joint examination. Only a little over a month had passed, and Frost's soul origin crystals had appeared in the cave. Why hadn't he sensed it when he went there? Li Daocheng found it strange that there hadn't been any magic gold fluctuations at all. Li Daocheng turned on his wristwatch and quickly searched for an introduction to Frost's soul origin crystals on the Spirit Intranet. It didn't take him long to find the relevant information. After reading it, Li Daocheng understood. It turned out that the formation of Frost's soul origin crystals was very special. First, the environment had to be a place of extreme Yin, the ice source point. At the same time, there was a kind of frost jade in that area at the beginning. The frost jade would slowly condense under the nourishment of the extreme Yin Qi. The bigger the frost jade bed, the higher the quality of the condensed frost soul origin crystals. This process would take about a few hundred years. When the frost soul origin crystals finally condensed into frost soul origin crystals, it would take several years for an ice crystal cocoon to form around the core. During this time, even a cultivator like Yuaning wouldn't be able to sense any magic gold fluctuations within 10 meters of it. They wouldn't be able to detect it even with dense spiritual detection equipment. When the ice crystal cocoon began to shatter, the magic gold fluctuations of the frost soul origin crystals would spread out. However, before the ice crystal cocoon completely shattered, no external force could be used to forcibly extract the frost soul origin crystals. Otherwise, the quality would be greatly reduced. What was more, what one would obtain wouldn't be frost soul origin crystals, but frost jade essence, which would become another kind of magic gold with a lower grade. It was no wonder that the Jin Dan cultivators on planet Crimson Sun could only stand outside and watch. After Li Daocheng learned more about the situation from Third Master Yin, he left Princess Catherine behind and flew away with the little monkey. The little monkey was only the size of 2 palms and could be carried in his arms. Moreover, this little thing was very slippery and easy to protect. It wasn't so convenient to carry Princess Catherine. Shuangyuan Town was very far from Crimson Sun City. It was more than 10,000 kilometers away. Back then, Li Daocheng had to take a shuttle bus and a special car to get to Shuangyuan Town. Now, he didn't have to go through so much trouble. Li Daocheng could reach the town in 1 or 2 hours if he flew at full speed. However, it would consume a lot of energy. Li Daocheng couldn't care less at this time. According to Third Master Yin's description, the Frost Soul Origin Crystal was at the final stage of breaking out of its cocoon. It could break out of its cocoon at any time. This Frost Soul Origin Crystal was half the size of a water tank. This was also the reason why the major powers were willing to cooperate. When the time came to divide it, it would be enough for their use. At this moment, there were dozens of cultivators guarding the entrance of the cave. They were divided into 3 groups. One group was led by the Yin clan, a group led by the other 3 major clans on planet Crimson Sun, and a group of rogue cultivators on planet Crimson Sunday. These 3 groups had gathered almost all the high-level cultivators on planet Crimson Sunday. There were more than 12 Jin Dan cultivators. The other 3 clans had joined forces because the 2 Jin Dan cultivators hired by the Yin clan were the 2 strongest Jin Dan cultivators on planet Crimson Sunday originally. Planet Crimson Sun had 3 great experts. They were Lu Xingzhan, Bai Yi, and Old Gun. However, 2 months ago, Lu Xingzhan had suddenly fallen. Of the 3 great experts on planet Crimson Sun, only 2 were left. Each of the 3 clans had 1 Jin Dan old ancestor. They had also hired 2 Jin Dan cultivators. In total, there were 5 Jin Dan cultivators. All of them were at the early Jin Dan stage. The rogue cultivators camp also consisted of 5 Jin Dan cultivators. As a result, the 12 Jin Dan cultivators on planet Crimson Sun were all present. It was a stalemate between 2, 5, and 5. Although the Yin clan had the least number of people, they still had Old Gun, who was at the peak of the intermediate Jin Dan stage. He was also the only intermediate Jin Dan cultivator on planet Crimson Sunday. Although Bai Yi was only at the early Jin Dan stage, her actual combat power was much higher than that of an ordinary Jin Dan cultivator. She could definitely take on 2 of them on her own. This situation had been maintained for more than half a month. There was no lack of verbal conflict, but no one made a move. No one wanted to be the first to break the stalemate. The three major powers were not willing to submit to each other, nor did they want to cooperate. After all, they already had enough people in their own camps. If they added more people, they would not be able to get much. It was also because of the existence of the three major powers that they did not make a move. Chapter 403. Li Daochong flew all the way. 3 hours later, he appeared outside Shuangyuan town without anyone noticing. The temperature here had obviously dropped a lot. A layer of frost had condensed on the ground, and it was very cold. Li Daochong looked around and then moved his telekinesis slightly. He immediately detected the exact location of the grotto. The area within 300 kilometers was actually a no-fly zone. There were also spiritual magnetic network warnings and people patrolling. However, it was obviously impossible for these to stop Li Daochong. Li Daochong stopped flying and walked toward the grotto. Every step he took was like an ordinary person taking a stroll, but with each step, he was dozens of meters away. More than 10 minutes later, Li Daochong arrived near the grotto. The temperature here dropped again. The frost on the ground had condensed into ice cubes, and the trees were directly turned into ice sculptures. However, it was summer in the northern part of Red Sun Planet. It was the hottest season of the year, but now the temperature here was 50 to 60 degrees below zero. If an ordinary person did not wear special clothes to resist the cold, they would be frozen into a popsicle in a short time. Of course, such a low temperature did not have much effect on Li Daochong. After being reborn, his spiritual body reached perfection. He did not need to control his qi. He could easily resist the cold with just his physical body. Li Daochong hid all his aura and hid under a tree to quietly observe the situation in the direction of the grotto. Sure enough, the situation was similar to what Third Master Yin had described. The three forces looked at each other in a triangular formation. 12 Jin Dan cultivators sat cross-legged on 12 large blue stones. These blue stones didn't exist when Li Daochong came here for the first time. They must have been moved here by someone later. Although Li Daochong's strength had increased rapidly, and he was not afraid of these Jin Dan cultivators on Red Sun Planet, he did not want to become the fourth force. Once the situation of the three forces was broken, a war would inevitably break out. If Li Daochong was alone, he could walk out openly and tell everyone to get lost. However, the Yin family had a good relationship with him, and Li Daochong had always regarded Ding Bang and Ansinuo as friends. If a fight really broke out, the two opposing forces had a lot of people. In a chaotic battle, Li Daochong didn't have the confidence to protect the Yin family. There would definitely be casualties. Therefore, the best way was to sneak into the Yin family's camp and maintain the balance of power. As for what would happen later, all they had to do was wait and see. So how could he sneak in? Li Daochong quietly observed for a while, before noticing that from time to time, some cultivators would come out to patrol the area. Li Daochong's eyes flickered slightly, and his power will spread out. It did not take long for him to detect the return of a cultivator from the Yin family who had been patrolling outside. Next, Li Daochong went into stealth mode. When he was over 20 kilometers away from the grotto, he intercepted the cultivator and knocked him unconscious. After putting on the cultivator's clothes and equipment, he put on a disguise before sneaking into the Yin family's camp. Li Daochong hadn't seen the Yin siblings for a while. At this moment, Ansinuo and Ding Bang were sitting cross-legged on either side of the Yin family's patriarch, Anmonian. Ansinuo was already at the middle stage of the Qi-gathering realm, while Ding Bang was at the peak stage of the Qi-gathering realm. Even Ammonian's cultivation had improved a little. The Yin family members were all around Ammonian. In addition to a few foundation establishment cultivators from the Yin family, there were also many guest cultivators, about 20 of them. In front of them were Bai Yi and Old Gun. The two of them had fought a life-and-death battle with Li Daochong in the grotto a few months ago and hadn't seen each other since. Li Daochong's power had long surpassed that of a foundation establishment cultivator. With a little interference, the cultivator who changed shifts didn't realize that the returning cultivator was no longer his colleague. He even nodded at Li Daochong before flying away. Li Daochong quietly entered the crowd. Coincidentally, the cultivator he knocked out was wearing a straw hat. He was a Ronin cultivator. Li Daochong had seen this person when he went to the family to rescue them. He felt a little embarrassed to knock him out. This Ronin cultivator carried a katana with him. The blade was slightly curved, 2 fingers wide, and the tip was extremely sharp. This kind of katana was deeply loved by Ronin cultivators. It was forged from a mixture of pan silver and gung silver. The entire blade was silver and 3 meters long. It was very suitable for slashing and piercing. Its weight was also relatively moderate, around 50 kilograms. It was the best weapon for Foundation establishment Ronin cultivators. Ronin cultivators were actually a type of rogue cultivator. This person's cultivation was at the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm and wasn't considered an expert here. Li Daochong suppressed his cultivation to the early stage of the Foundation establishment realm and lowered his straw hat. No one noticed him as he blended into the family's camp. The 3 forces were on guard against each other. The 12 Jin Dan cultivators seemed to be sitting cross-legged with their eyes closed in a meditative state. In fact, their telekinesis was always on high alert. If there was any movement around them, they would be the first to discover it. Li Daochong wasn't in a hurry. After blending into the family's camp, he also sat cross-legged and used his telekinesis to explore the grotto in front of him. He quickly understood the situation in the grotto. 100 meters underground in the deepest part of the grotto, there was an ice crystal cocoon the size of a water tank that was full of cracks. It seemed like it could completely collapse at any time. An intense cold air surged out from within. Even Li Daochong felt a bone-chilling cold. The surrounding temperature had dropped because of this. Just as Li Daochong was exploring, the ice crystal cocoon suddenly trembled. Ka-ba, criss-cracking sounds could be heard. The fragments of the ice crystal cocoon began to fall, revealing the ice-like substance inside. However, compared to the icicles, it was more crystalline and translucent. It shone like a diamond. Even though there was no light underground, it still emitted a golden glow. This was the Frost Soul Origin Crystal. When Li Daochong discovered that the ice crystal cocoon had begun to crack, the 12 Jin Dan cultivators naturally discovered it as well. Almost at the same time, the 12 Jin Dan cultivators opened their eyes at the same time. A hint of excitement flashed across their eyes. The Frost Soul Origin Crystal was the Dharma Gold used to make Dharma treasures and weapons of the Mystic Spirit treasure level. Not to mention the Jin Dan cultivators. Even the Yuanian cultivators would find it difficult to obtain a Mystic Spirit treasure. Mystic Spirit treasures were already the top Dharma treasures in the Federation. Even Soul Formation Grand cultivators used them. This showed how precious the Frost Soul Origin Crystal was. Once obtained, it could be used to make a Mystic Spirit treasure. Even if they couldn't obtain the other materials, they could use the Frost Soul Origin Crystal to make a superior grade Mystic Spirit treasure. Faced with such a huge temptation, these Jin Dan cultivators couldn't hide the excitement in their hearts. However, even though they couldn't hold it in anymore, no one made any moves. The 3 families were led by 3 patriarchs. These 3 patriarchs were Yi Jing-tu of the Yi family, Dong Yuan of the Dong family, and Shimin Jin of the Shimin family. It seemed like the descendants of the Black Tortoise Yi family were everywhere in the 4th ring star zone. This was enough to show how powerful the Black Tortoise Yi family was. The 3 patriarchs looked at each other. Then, Yi Jing-tu looked at Old Gun of the family and said in a deep voice, "Fellow Daoist Yang, it's not a good idea for us to be in a stalemate like this. When the treasure is born, it's up to the capable. I estimate that this ice crystal cocoon will completely shatter in 2 or 3 hours, and the Frost Soul Origin Crystal will appear. Since none of us are willing to give in, and there are so many people, why don't we have a competition? Whoever wins in the end will get the Frost Soul Origin Crystal." As soon as Yi Jing-tu finished speaking, the lone cultivators and the family looked at each other. Old Gun's original name was Xiangding. He was called Old Gun because of the weapon he used. However, not many people knew his real name. Old Gun and Bai Yi exchanged a few words through voice transmission. Then, Old Gun said loudly, "Fellow Taoist Yi, fellow Taoist Yang, and fellow Taoist, I have no objections. However, our agreement doesn't count. If fellow Taoist Wang and the others don't agree, your proposal will go down the drain." The fellow Taoist Wang that Old Gun mentioned was the leader of the lone cultivators, Wang Qinshi. His cultivation was at the peak of the early stage Jin Dan. Apart from Wang Qinshi, the other four people on the lone cultivator side were Taoist Master Formless Chun Yuan, Taoist Master Kongming Lu Jingtian, Old Man Green Bamboo Zhang Shou, and Fairy Piaoling Zhou Rong. Lone cultivators did not have any power. However, they relied on their own efforts to reach the Jindan realm. They had rich combat experience. In terms of strength, they were much stronger than Jindan cultivators who grew up under the protection of their families. Although this was not absolute, it was applicable in most cases. Lone cultivators were more suited for one-on-one battles. The five lone cultivators looked at each other and secretly discussed the matter through voice transmission. "Fellow Taoist Wang, I think we can agree." Taoist Master Formless, Chun Yuan, expressed his agreement. "I object. If we fight one-on-one, Old Gun and Bai Yi will have a huge advantage. If we attack them together, we still have a chance of winning. However, if we attack them one by one, we'll just be sending ourselves to our deaths." Taoist Master Kongming, Lu Jingtian, immediately raised his objection. Lu Jingtian was right. The five of them fell silent for a while. Then an old voice sounded. "I think we can agree." Old Man Green Bamboo, Zhang Shou, said. "Why? Old Man Zhang, do you want to send yourself to your deaths as well?" Taoist Master Kongming, Lu Jingtian, was anxious. "Fellow Taoist Lu, don't be impatient. It's not the five of us fighting Old Gun. Don't forget that there's still Yijing too and the rest. As long as we make the right arrangements, it'll be most beneficial to our side. No matter how powerful Old Gun is, he'll still be tired. If we attack them one by one, it might seem like we'll be benefiting the powerful Old Gun and Bai Yi, but there are two great benefits for us," Old Man Green Bamboo said unhurriedly. "What are the two great benefits?" Lu Jingtian did not understand. The other three also pricked up their ears and looked at Old Man Green Bamboo. After a pause, the old voice sounded again. "First, the battle is not a life-and-death battle. This way, we can avoid death. No matter how good the treasure is, I believe that none of you want to lose your lives. Even if the battle is a little too harsh, we can still save our companions and ensure their lives." This time, Lu Jingtian nodded as well. Old Man Green Bamboo continued. "Second, because it's not a life-and-death battle, we can give it our all and weaken Old Gun and Bai Yi to the greatest extent. How long can they last if we fight them one by one? Because we're stronger than Yijing Tu and the rest in actual combat, we can gain an advantage in the end." After hearing this, Lu Jingtian no longer objected. Seeing that no one objected, Wang Qinshi turned around and replied, "We agree as well." Old Gun nodded and then looked at Yijing Tu. "Fellow Taoist Yi, since you're the one who suggested the battle, how do we do it?" Yijing Tu was already prepared. Yijing Tu was already prepared for this. A hint of a smile flashed across his eyes as he replied, "It's very simple. The first round of the competition will be decided by the wheel. Which two parties will go on stage? The third party will be given a bye. The winner of the first round will continue to compete with the person sent by the third party. The winner of the first round can continue to compete with the person sent by the third party. The winner of the first round can continue to compete with the person sent by the third party. The winner of the first round can continue to compete with the person sent by the third party. The winner can continue to compete with the winner, or they can also arrange another person to compete. In short, the winner will remain in the arena, while the loser will be given a bye for the next round. However, the loser of any round will not be allowed to compete again. But because there are only two of you, fellow Taoist Xiang and fellow Taoist Bai, You can decide for yourselves. In the end, the last person to remain in the arena will be the winner. After hearing this, there was a pause for a few seconds. The rogue cultivators and the clan were both considering the rationality of the rules. The 12 Gene Dan cultivators were silent, but the other cultivators were discussing animatedly, all talking at once. However, no one dared to speak too loudly. They had no right to speak here. If they angered the Gene Dan cultivators, it would not end well for them. Senior Yes suggestion is quite good. We're all cultivators of the Scarlet Sun planet. So why do we have to fight to the death? It's quite good that we don't have to fight to the death. That's right, that's right. We all know each other. If we really want to fight, I really can't bring myself to do it. I wonder what Yijing 2 is up to, someone muttered softly. I don't know what's going on, but it's quite good to be able to witness a battle between Gene Dan cultivators. Many cultivators in the clan's camp felt that it was unreasonable. After all, there were too few of them. There were only Old Gun and Bai Yi, while the other two sides had 5 people each. If they calculated it this way, it felt like the other two sides were ganging up to deal with the clan. Hearing the discussions around him, Li Daochong had a strange expression on his face. Yijing 2 had suddenly proposed a battle to determine the ownership of the Frost Soul Origin Crystal. He felt that something was wrong. Suddenly, Li Daochong's expression froze. He seemed to have thought of something and immediately said, Senior Xiang, Senior Bai, you can't agree to it. This shout was very sudden. The discussions around them were not loud. Instantly, all eyes were cast on the guy wearing a straw hat standing among the clan cultivators. Old Gun said in a low voice, Why can't we agree? Li Daochong's face was hidden under the straw hat. He replied, Because there's a problem with the winning rules. Why don't we change it so that the side that wins the most battles will be the final winner instead of the side that stays in the end? As soon as Li Daochong finished speaking, a wave of pressure came from Yijing 2's body. The cultivators standing around Li Daochong suddenly felt their blood and qi churn. They felt extremely uncomfortable and their legs trembled involuntarily. Gene Dan's pressure was not something they could withstand. After hearing this, the corners of Yijing 2's eyes twitched violently. This damned ant dared to ruin his carefully thought-out plan. Chapter 404. After Old Gun and Bai Yi heard the Straw Hat cultivator's words, they looked at each other and quickly thought of something. Yijing 2 had said a lot of things, but in fact, he was trying to cover it up. He wanted everyone's attention to be focused on the competition and ignored the clause about who would win in the end. Even Old Gun and Bai Yi had ignored the key point. They felt that with their strength, they would have no problem standing until the end. However, it would be useless even if they won 7 or 8 rounds. As long as they lost 1 round and were no longer on the field, they would lose. Due to their disadvantage in numbers, as long as they went on the field, they would have to stay on the field and would not even have a chance to breathe. If they lost, they would have to change people. The winning side could also change people. This way, the other side would keep a spot. Even if they lost this round, they would have a bye in the next round, and the other side would send someone to fight again. This was clearly a trap for Old Gun and Bai Yi. Fellow Taoist Yi, I think this little friend is right. Why is it not the side that wins the most rounds, but the side that stands at the end the winner? Old Gun's expression darkened. Yijing 2's face was ashen. Originally, he didn't need to burn his essence blood to deal with Old Pal. However, after the Straw Hat cultivator's words, he couldn't back down now. In front of so many people, he couldn't back down now. Fortunately, he could still use the Black Tortoise bloodline. However, he would have to pay a huge price. Damn Straw Hat cultivator. Once I get rid of Old Gun and Bai Yi, you will be the first person I kill. Yijing 2's face twitched as he thought about it. If that's the case, then we'll determine the winner based on the side with the most wins. Old Gun's expression relaxed. If that's the case, I agree to the competition. Wang Qinshi immediately expressed his agreement. Immediately after, the 12 Gene Dan cultivators bit their fingertips and made a blood oath. If they agreed to bet, they had to accept defeat. Whoever went back on their word would be struck by lightning. For cultivators, blood oaths were extremely intimidating. Once violated, they would encounter a powerful lightning tribulation when they tried to make a breakthrough. Then, Old Gun, Yizheng Tu, and Wang Qinshi walked to the middle of the field to check the wheel. After the three of them confirmed that there was no problem with the wheel, they placed it on the ground and let a weak rogue cultivator spin it. When the rogue cultivator attacked, 3 streams of telekinesis were added to his body, so he didn't dare to make any strange movements. He could only rely on his arm strength to spin the wheel. In the end, the wheel pointed to Wang Qinshi. In the first round, the rogue cultivator's side was left empty. One side of the 3 great clans against the clan. The sound waves still penetrated the shield and hit their eardrums. They felt as if their heads were about to explode. No one noticed that among the many cultivators of the clan, the cultivator with a straw hat covering his face stood motionless in the crowd. He was completely unaffected by the airwave and sound wave. When the airwave and sound wave hit him, they automatically split apart as if to avoid him. Yizheng took a small step back, and then more than 10 flying swords flew out from behind him and shot at Old Gun. The sky bell hammer returned to Old Gun's hand with a swoosh, and he swung it at the incoming flying swords. More than 10 flying swords were all sent flying. However, at this moment, Yizheng had already arrived in front of Old Gun. The shield in his hand spun at an extremely high speed and slashed at Old Gun from the side. Old Gun was shocked. He didn't expect Yizheng to be so fierce. He had just taken his hammerhead on and was completely fine. This seemed a little unreasonable. Old Gun was very clear about Yizheng's strength. He was at the peak of the early stage of Jindan, and there was a clear gap between him and Yizheng. However, now that they were fighting, Old Gun felt that he was facing a mid-stage Jindan cultivator who was on par with him. Old Gun swung his hammer again. Creak, creak, creak. The sky bell hammer and the high-speed rotating shield collided with each other, making an ear-piercing sound of friction. Sparks flew everywhere, and when the sparks fell to the ground, they immediately melted and evaporated the frost on the ground. The air was filled with the unpleasant smell of melting metal. Yizheng held the shield in one hand and punched Old Gun with the other, who hurriedly blocked. With a bang, Old Gun was repelled more than 10 meters away. If it weren't for the strong resistance of the sky bell hammer on the ground, he would have been sent flying far away. Yizheng's attack succeeded, and he didn't stop at all. More than 10 flying swords shot out again. The continuous barrage of attacks rained down on Old Pao. The strength that Yizheng showed was far beyond his usual level. He actually suppressed the number 1 master of Red Sun Planet to the point that he couldn't even fight back. The 3 great clans were naturally excited. On the other hand, the clan side was disheartened. Sinuo and Dingbang both showed anxious expressions. Some of the cultivators hired by the clan began to feel a little uneasy. They no longer gathered together and instead distanced themselves as if they were ready to leave at any time. There were also a few cultivators who looked at the Straw Hat cultivator sympathetically. Someone shook his head and said, "That Straw Hat cultivator is finished. Yizheng probably won't let this guy go." Isn't that so? You're just a little early-stage foundation establishment cultivator. Why did you have to steal the limelight in front of a Jindan cultivator? Even if you saw something, you had to pretend that you didn't know anything. Now, not only did you fail to steal the limelight, you even offended Yizheng. Is this what they mean by being too smart for your own good? Silence is golden. Some people will never know the true meaning of these 4 words. In addition to the sarcastic remarks, 2 friends who knew the Straw Hat cultivator comforted him. "Sumao, hurry up and leave now." The Straw Hat cultivator raised his head slightly and grinned. "Why should I leave when there's such a wonderful battle to watch?" Chapter 405. The strength Yizheng displayed was far beyond his imagination. Old Gun originally wanted to end the battle quickly, but after a few moves, he was forced to retreat again and again. Soon, the onlooking cultivators saw the clues. Yi Jingtu's aura is a bit abnormal. Taoist, master formless, Chun Yuan, had a strange expression on his face. He had a guess, but he didn't dare to confirm it. Old Man Empty Bamboo, Zhang Shou, looked a bit surprised. Fellow Taoist, Yi seems determined to get the Frost Soul Origin Crystal. He didn't hesitate to burn his blood essence to fight Old Gun. I underestimated fellow Taoist Ye's determination. Fairy Piaoling, Zhou Rong's thin lips moved slightly. As a new Jin Dan cultivator, she was somewhat reserved. Originally, Bai Yi was the only female Jin Dan cultivator on Planet Crimson Sunday. Fairy Piaoling, Zhou Rong, had only appeared recently. However, Zhou Rong was different from Bai Yi. The latter wasn't from Planet Crimson Sun. She had migrated there, while Zhou Rong was born and raised there. Before entering Jin Dan, Zhou Rong was already somewhat famous among the cultivators on Planet Crimson Sunday. Her skill with the Piaoling dart was superb. Zhou Rong was the kind of person who was well prepared. When she was in school, she didn't stand out and wasn't even qualified to participate in the 100 schools joint examination. However, later on, Zhou Rong traveled outside and went to the 3rd Ring Star Zone. After returning, her cultivation improved greatly. Then, she went to the 5th Ring Star Zone for an adventure and broke through again. When she returned to Planet Crimson Sun, she was already a late-stage foundation building cultivator. As a female cultivator, she was quite outstanding. However, later on, Zhou Rong's cultivation speed slowed down. 5 years ago, she entered the peak of Jin Dan. After that, she didn't break through until 2 months ago when she passed by Shuangyuan Town. A sudden heavy snow gave her an epiphany. She found a secluded place and went into seclusion. 1 month later, she broke through to Jin Dan. She became the 2nd Jin Dan female cultivator on Planet Crimson Sun in 100 years. Zhou Rong wasn't clear about her specific strength because she hadn't fought since she entered Jin Dan. However, when Zhou Rong was in the 5-ring starfield, she had an impressive battle record. Because there were no witnesses, only she knew about it. At that time, Zhou Rong had just reached the late stage of the Foundation establishment stage. She had encountered the Red Shadow, ferocious ghost on a grade 5 cultivation planet that was riddled with holes. She had killed the Red Spectre with her late Foundation establishment cultivation. Although it was a Pyrrhic victory, she had still won. Back in the grotto, even Bai Yi and Jin Dan had a hard time dealing with the Red Shadow malicious ghost. Therefore, the strongest person among the rogue cultivators was actually Zhou Rong. It was just that no one knew, not even Zhou Rong herself. Zhou Rong could tell at a glance that Yi Zhangtu was burning his blood essence, but she didn't say anything. As the battle between Old Gun and Yi Zhangtu became more and more intense, even the cultivators with low cultivation levels could see some clues. Yi Zhangtu must have either used some secret technique or burned his blood essence. In short, he must have paid a great price to obtain the strength to fight Old Gun. The moment this match started, it raised the level of the competition to a peak. For a rank 4 cultivation planet like Planet Scarlet Sun, the level of the competition had reached a peak. This was a battle of the pinnacle. Old Gun was forced into a corner by Yi Jingtu and also erupted with strength that exceeded his limit. The Sky Bell Hammer transformed into a giant hammer. It was the size of a small mountain. This had already surpassed the realm of cultivation techniques and reached the realm of divine powers. Cultivation techniques were ultimately a means of using the body to attack. Divine powers, on the other hand, were beyond the realm of the body. They used the spirit chi of heaven and earth, the 5 elements, and spiritual consciousness to attack. Divine powers originally meant that one's thoughts were clear. In cultivation, having a clear mind meant that one had entered a different realm. The power of cultivation techniques could not be compared to divine powers. When one cultivated a cultivation technique to the extreme, it could not uproot mountains and fill seas. Reaching the level of the Blood Ape King after his transformation was already extremely powerful. Of course, the Blood Ape King had not yet reached the extreme. His body had entered the path of Tao refinement, and his final achievement could reach Yuanying's level. It was impossible for him to go any higher. A body cultivator at Yuanying's level could only be described as terrifying. He was an indestructible steel puppet that could drill into a planet and use it as a blender. It was a piece of cake for him to create a giant pit in a planet with one punch. However, it was impossible for him to shatter a planet with one punch. The limit of body refinement was the Yuanying stage. It was impossible to reach the soul formation stage. If one's thoughts were not clear, no matter how powerful one's physique was, one would not be able to reach the soul formation stage. In the end, one would fall behind by a level. Even if there were body cultivators in the soul formation stage, they would only have one more technique. The truly powerful ones were still divine powers. At this moment, Old Gun threw out the sky bell hammer. The hammer transformed into a few hundred meters in size. This was one of the elementary divine powers. Li Daocheng's heavenly thunder spell, Eye of Thunder Punishment, was slightly more brilliant. Old Gun used a Dharma treasure, while Li Daocheng used elements derived from the 5 elements. One had form, while the other had no form. The power could not be judged. It depended on the strength of the user of the divine power. At the Jin Dan stage, one would already have the initial conditions to release divine powers, but it would be difficult to use them freely. Old Gun's physical strength and spirit chi were almost depleted. The Jin Dan dimmed significantly. However, if such a huge hammer were to smash down, the power would be unimaginable. A city would be razed to the ground. The cultivators, who had originally felt safe standing 500 meters away, retreated again without thinking. They only felt at ease after retreating 2 to 3 kilometers away. Some retreated, but some did not. The patriarchs of the 3 major families and a few direct descendants were protected by late-stage or peak-stage foundation establishment cultivators. They were also protected by the most advanced spirit magnetic shield in front of them. Naturally, they did not need to retreat. The siblings and Monian and a few elders of the family were the same. They were surrounded by a spirit light shield. This spirit light shield could last for several hours. It was said that it could withstand a full force attack from an early-stage Jin Dan cultivator without shattering. With this thing protecting them, they naturally did not need to retreat. However, everyone's attention was focused on the battle between the 2 great cultivators, so they neglected some details. For example, the Straw Hat cultivator, who everyone thought was doomed, was standing more than 10 meters behind the family. He had no intention of retreating. Moreover, this Straw Hat cultivator was not only unscathed from the aftershocks of the battle, but the expression on his face hidden under the straw hat was even very relaxed. The aftershocks of the battle were like a gentle breeze to him. It was not dangerous at all. In fact, it was quite comfortable. Yijing too was shocked. This Old Gun was going to fight to the death with him. Yijing too threw the shield in his hand. It instantly enlarged and covered the area above him like a giant turtle shell. More than 10 flying swords flew out again and shot towards Old Gun. Bang! The mountain-like hammer smashed onto the giant turtle shell and exploded with a deafening sound. The sound waves from this explosion shattered everything within a 10-kilometer radius. Trees, rocks, and even the ground were all shattered. Yijing Tu's chest tightened. He took a deep breath, and the flying swords shot towards Old Gun without slowing down. A flag appeared in Old Gun's hand. It was a flag with a top engraved on it. After throwing it out, the top on the flag transformed and mixed with the flying swords. Clang! 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 The flying sword were all repelled. Uft. Old Gun had used his divine ability twice in a row. It was already beyond what he could bear. He spat out a mouthful of blood, and his face was pale. Yijing Tu was not much better. However, compared to Old Gun, he seemed to have more energy left. With a shake of his hand, a flame shot out. It was a spirit talisman. Old Gun was shocked. Yijing Tu really had many tricks up his sleeve. Old Gun naturally had spirit talismans as well. However, he did not plan to use them. After all, high-grade spirit talismans were too expensive. Now was not the time to be distressed over the price. If he did not use them, not only would he be defeated, he might also be seriously injured. Old Gun also released 2 spirit talismans. They were both level 10 spirit talismans. Boom! The spirit talismans collided in the air and exploded into a huge fireball with a diameter of more than 300 meters. The temperature of the cold weather suddenly rose, and the frost on the ground instantly melted. Old Pao heaved a sigh of relief. He no longer hoped that he could defeat Yijing Tu. A draw would be the best result. Just as Old Pao regained his senses, the fireball in the air came crashing down in his direction. "What?" Old Gun exclaimed as he looked at the scene in disbelief. This meant that the power of Yijing Tu's fire talisman was far above that of Old Gun's spirit talisman. 2 against 1, they still could not withstand it. Old Gun used the last of his strength to retreat. Blood kept flowing out his mouth. Boom! The huge fireball smashed into the ground and exploded. Chapter 406. A flying sword flew in front of Old Gun and stopped in midair. However, the flying sword buzzed as if it would attack at any moment and pierce through Old Gun's head. Naturally, this flying sword was controlled by Yijing Tu. A trace of blood seeped out of the corner of Yijing Tu's mouth. His qi and blood were unstable, but compared to Old Gun, he was still in a much better state. He did not suffer any serious internal injuries, but there were some side effects from burning his blood essence. Old Gun's final attack had shocked Yijing Tu, and he had almost failed to withstand it. Looking at the flying sword, Old Gun had no choice but to admit defeat. "Fellow Taoist, yes, skills are impressive. I admit defeat," Old Gun said in a low voice as he forced himself to take a deep breath. "Ha ha ha, you're too kind." Fellow Taoist Xiang's heaven bell hammer shocked everyone. "If I didn't have so many Dharma treasures, I would have lost to you a long time ago." Yijing Tu was secretly pleased. It would be strange if he was not pleased to be able to defeat the #1 expert of Planet Crimson Sun in front of so many people. However, he still replied appropriately. Apart from the 3 major clans, the other 2 parties sneered in their hearts when they heard Yijing Tu's words. "You only won by a narrow margin after burning your blood essence. But you actually said you had many Dharma treasures? Why would you cultivate if you had so many Dharma treasures? Why not just get more Dharma treasures? Wouldn't that make tool refinement masters invincible?" Many cultivators thought so, but they did not dare to show it. Yijing Tu was a Jindan cultivator and the Yi clan's patriarch. He could kill you in a matter of minutes. Who would dare to mock him? Yijing Tu won the first round. The 3 major clans were all delighted. Many of them did not expect Yijing Tu to win. After all, Old Gun's reputation had been on Planet Crimson Sun for 30 to 40 years. It was deeply rooted in everyone's hearts. On the other side, the clan members were crestfallen. Amanian seemed to have aged 10 years in an instant. His straight back bent, and his hair turned white in an instant. This time, the family had spent so much effort and almost went bankrupt to fight for the Frost Soul Origin Crystal. Aside from the fact that the treasure itself was incredibly valuable, the other reason was that Ammonian's wife and several elders had been kidnapped a month ago. The other party had only left a note with only 1 sentence written on it. "If you want him alive, you have to exchange the Frost Soul Source Crystal for him. Time limit, 40 days. The other party was very mysterious. Even though the clan was one of the 4 great clans of the Scarlet Sun planet, they still couldn't find any information about the other party. Furthermore, 3 late Foundation establishment cultivators from the clan went to rescue them, but none of them returned. 3 days later, the family received a warning from the other party. "If you don't behave, I'll immediately kill the hostages and slaughter the entire family." Some of the family members suggested reporting the matter to the Security Bureau. All the signs indicated that the other party was likely to be a powerful cultivator. But in the end, Ammonian rejected this suggestion, because while the family was discussing countermeasures in the secret chamber, the kidnappers actually sent him a telepathic message. Apart from another warning, Ammonian's eldest brother, and Machuan, and the other 2 Foundation establishment cultivators of the family were all dumbfounded on the spot. The other party's strength was beyond the Inclan's comprehension. It seemed far away, but it was also right in front of them. The Inclan's influence on the Scarlet Sun planet was definitely at the top. But in front of the other party, they were as helpless as a little chick. The few remaining high-ranking members of the Inclan fell into a state of panic. The other party's background was unknown, and his strength was beyond their imagination. He wasn't someone the Inclan could fight against. Their only option was to exchange the Frost Soul Source Crystal. And Monian had no choice but to use everything he had and come up with a plan to seize the Frost Soul Source Crystal. In fact, when Monian's wife was kidnapped, the Frost Soul Source Crystal hadn't appeared yet. At first, the Inclan was confused. The Frost Soul Source Crystal was an extremely rare magic metal. There weren't many of them in the entire Federation. It was an extremely important strategic resource for the Federation. The Inclan was very powerful on the Scarlet Sun planet, but in the Federation, they were just a slightly stronger ant. To put it bluntly, the Inclan didn't have the ability to obtain the Frost Soul Source Crystal. At first, the Inclan couldn't figure out the other party's intentions at all. They were just deliberately making things difficult for them. However, when the Frost Soul Source Crystal appeared 10 days later, the high-ranking members of the Inclan felt a chill run down their spines. It was obvious that the other party had already known that the Frost Soul Source Crystal would appear on the Scarlet Sun planet. That was why they had kidnapped the Inclan. What kind of person could know that the Frost Soul Source Crystal would appear before it even appeared? This alone was enough to prove that the other party had a powerful background. He was no longer someone the Inclan could touch. After combining all these incidents, the Inclan felt like they were being targeted by a terrifying force. Monian completely gave up on any thoughts of resistance. Resistance was useless. Instead, it would only enrage the other party and doom the Inclan. In recent years, the Inclan had encountered one strange incident after another. It was almost nonstop. From Monian's illness to the entire core of the clan, and Ping was crippled. And Sinuo originally had a 5-elemental spirit meridian, but for some reason, it became a normal spirit meridian, causing his talent to plummet. In reality, if they hadn't met a benefactor like Li Daochong on the Blue Bay Star, the Inclan might have collapsed a year ago. Now, they were being targeted by a terrifying force, and Monian couldn't understand. The Inclan wasn't the only one on the Scarlet Sun planet. Why did the other party choose the Inclan? Later on, Monian discovered that the other party only controlled the Inclan. Given the other party's terrifying strength, it wouldn't be difficult for them to control the entire Scarlet Sun planet. Why do they have to make things so complicated? If they appear to steal the Frost Soul Source Crystal, who on the Scarlet Sun planet would be able to stop them? Just Old Gun and a few Jindan cultivators? Although Monian hadn't even seen the other party's shadow, he was certain that the other party could wipe out all the Jindan cultivators on the Scarlet Sun planet with a single finger. And Monian even believed that even the Security Bureau couldn't do anything to the other party. However, the more terrifying the other party was, the more curious Monian was. Why didn't they come and take it themselves? It was simple, crude, and easy. However, such a terrifying existence had chosen the most complicated method. And Monian wasn't a fool. He quickly realized that either the other party couldn't show themselves, or there was a reason why they couldn't do it themselves. The more he thought about it, the more terrifying it was. In one of Monian's conversations with Sinuo, his daughter had casually said, "Why are these people like ghosts?" The speaker didn't mean it, but the listener understood. Monian sucked in a breath of cold air. His daughter's words made him think of another possibility. This terrifying power came from the Hades. If that was true, then it was truly terrifying. For the Inclan, it would be a disaster that they couldn't resist at all. Monian didn't tell anyone about this, nor did he dare to. The only thing Monian could do was to fight for the Frost Soul Source Crystal with everything he had and exchange it for his wife and a few elders. As for whether the other party would let them go or kill them to silence them, there was no point in considering it. The difference in power was too great. It was just like the difference between a mortal and a cultivator. and Monian used almost all the resources and power the clan could muster to finally hire the #1 expert on planet Crimson Sun, Old Gun, and Bai Yi. With the support of these two Jindan cultivators, and Monian was determined to win. He felt that his chances of obtaining the Frost Soul Source Crystal were very high. That was what Monian thought until about 10 minutes ago. However, when Old Gun admitted defeat, Monian felt as if he had been struck by lightning. His heart almost stopped beating. Old Gun's admission of defeat was practically a death sentence for his wife. No, it should be said that it was a death sentence for the entire clan. Old Gun was supported by 2 Foundation establishment cultivators back to the clan's camp. His expression was extremely ugly, and his internal injuries were very serious. There was no way he could continue fighting. Only Bai Yi was left on the clan's side. Senior Xiang, and Monian called out worriedly. Old Gun waved his hand and didn't say anything. He then sat down cross-legged, took out a few spirit pills, and swallowed them. He immediately began to recuperate. Senior Bai, what should we do now? Monian grasped at his last straw of hope. Don't worry. Since I've already accepted the commission, I'll do my best to help the clan no matter what happens. Although Old Gun lost, Yijing too is also crippled. Even if he wins, he won't be able to fight again. Bai Yi saw through Monian's worries at a glance. In that case, Junior thanks Senior White. Monian was afraid that Bai Yi would leave or change sides when she saw that the situation was not good. If that really happened, the clan wouldn't be able to do anything to her. Hiring Jindan cultivators was an extremely risky thing to do. When he heard Bai Yi's words, and Monian's mental defenses, which had almost collapsed, finally stabilized slightly. Chapter 407. Old Gun lost, and Yijing to won. The 3 major clans each won 1 round, and the family lost 1 round. In the second round, the loser would have a bye, and the winner would fight with the rogue cultivators again. Just as Bai Yi said, Yijing too could no longer fight. When Old Gun admitted defeat, his body was empty and he was very weak. The price of burning his blood essence was not only 30 years of his life, but would also damage his inner foundation. It would take months for him to recover. Of course, Yijing too was not completely useless. He was more than enough to deal with cultivators below the Jindan level, but he could no longer fight with Jindan cultivators. According to the rules, Yijing too would not stay in the field. The 3 major clans sent out Shimin Jin, the ancestor of the Shimin family, for the second round. The rogue cultivators sent Chun Yuan, the Taoist master of Formless. Shimin Jin was at the early Jindan level. He was the last of the 3 ancestors to step into the Jindan level. He was much younger and weaker. However, the Shimin family had a set of techniques and a magic treasure that was passed down from the ancient times. It was said that they were ancient treasures passed down from the ancient times. The Shimin family used to be a super family in the ancient times and had produced several soul formation cultivators. However, they gradually declined as they developed. Only a set of techniques and a magic treasure were left. The technique was called the Forbidden Snow Technique, and the magic treasure was a flying snow sword that was less than 4 feet long. However, this seemingly ordinary sword could cut through iron like mud and cut through gold and stone. It was a superior grade, mysterious spirit treasure. Combined with the Forbidden Snow Technique, the descendants of the Shimin family had always been better than their peers. Chun Yuan and Shimin Jin walked into the field, and their auras exploded. The test had begun from the moment they stepped into the field. Chun Yuan was called the Taoist Master of Formless because the technique he cultivated was called the Formless Cloud Hand. He was a Jindan body cultivator. Chun Yuan's magic treasure was a pair of gloves that could release hidden weapons. A short knife could be extended from the back of his hand. The outcome of the fight between the two could only be determined after the fight. Both of them were close combat cultivators and were not good at spells. As for supernatural powers, according to their past attacks, they did not seem to have any. Shimin Jin was the first to attack. The flying snow sword changed into a silver light and rushed towards Chun Yuan. The latter raised both of his hands, and that pair of silver-white gloves emitted a faint brilliance. This battle was extremely intense. The two of them went up to the sky and down to the ground. Their shadows were everywhere. However, the shockwaves from their fight were far weaker than those of Old Gun and Yijing too. Close combat paid more attention to details. Stability, accuracy, and ruthlessness were the key. One did not pursue lethality, and one's focus was only on one target. In the end, Chen Yuan was defeated in one move, and Shimanjin was victorious. The rogue cultivators lost one round, while the three great clans won 2 rounds. This competition was developing in a more and more advantageous direction for the three great clans. In the 3rd round, the Yin family could only send by Yi, while the 3 families continued to fight. However, Shimanjin was also exhausted. This time, the 3 great clans sent out the Dong family's ancestor, Dong Yuan. Dong Yuan was a Jindan cultivator on planet Crimson Sunday. He was ranked 3rd after Old Gun and Bai Yi. The Dong family was different from the Shiman family. They did not have a glorious past. In fact, the Dong family did not even exist hundreds of years ago. It was not until a Jindan cultivator appeared in Dong Yuan's previous generation that the Dong family gradually prospered and established the Dong family. When it came to Dong Yuan's generation, there were a few more talented people, and Dong Yuan was one of the best. Perhaps because they were new, the Dong family's method of training the next generation was extremely harsh. It could even be judged as unreasonable. At the age of 6, they had to survive in the wilderness for 3 days. If they survived, they would be trained by the family. If they did not survive, there would not even be anyone to collect their corpses. Therefore, the descendants of the Dong family were extremely valiant. Their cultivation was also the same. Whether it was mental cultivation techniques, or supernatural powers, they all pursued firmness and fierceness. The Dong family's fist technique, Dong family saber technique, and blazing flame technique were all self-created by the previous generation of the Dong family. The Dong family's Dharma treasures and weapons were relatively simple. They were basically heavy weapons. Dong Yuan was the same. He could use a mountain-splitting axe to perfection. Bai Yi faced Dong Yuan with a hint of fear in her eyes. She had never fought with Dong Yuan before. Bai Yi had always been regarded as the second most powerful cultivator on planet Crimson Sun after Old Gun. Her white phoenix silk belt had many transformations and was illusory. Once it was used, there was no way to figure out. Dong Yuan was ferocious. Bai Yi was ethereal. It was also difficult to determine who was stronger. Dong Yuan held the mountain-splitting axe in his hand. His tiger-like eyes shot out an aggressive brilliance. He looked at Bai Yi as if he wanted to devour her. Bai Yi's expression did not change much. Her white robe fluttered in the wind like a fairy. Her white phoenix silk belt was hidden in her sleeves, ready to attack at any time. Dong Yuan said in a deep voice, "Taoist Bai, I have long heard that your white phoenix silk belt is strange and unpredictable. I have long wanted to exchange pointers with Taoist Bai. Today, I can consider my wish fulfilled." Bai Yi faintly smiled. "Fellow Taoist Dong, your mountain-splitting axe looks very frightening. In a moment, please show mercy and don't chop this little girl in half." When Dong Yuan heard this, he looked up and laughed. "Taoist Bai, I have heard that other than your powerful cultivation technique, you are also very good at using women. Your soft words have a seductive tone. I have never believed it. Now, it seems that the rumors are true. Unfortunately, your little tricks are useless against me. Let's talk with our strength. Come on." With that, Dong Yuan raised the mountain-splitting axe in his hand and chopped it towards Bai Yi. He did not have any intention of holding back. He could not wait to cut Bai Yi in half. Many of the cultivators who were watching from afar had some sighs in their eyes. They seemed to be reluctant. Bai Yi was a high and mighty fairy in the eyes of Jindan cultivators on planet Crimson Sunday. "This Dong Yuan is really ruthless," someone said. Bai Yi did not expect that her seductive words did not affect Dong Yuan at all. She could not help but feel a little regretful. Dong Yuan's axe was at least more than 10 meters away from Bai Yi, but the axe light was more than 20 meters away. Bai Yi retreated and leaped into the sky. Boom! The axe light chopped down, and a gully dozens of meters long and several meters deep appeared on the ground. If Bai Yi was hit, she would not be able to withstand it. As Bai Yi dodged, the white phoenix silk ribbon in her sleeve flew out like a wriggling white snake toward Dong Yuan. Dong Yuan's expression changed, and he grasped the huge axe in his hand horizontally. The white phoenix silk ribbon hit the surface of the axe with a muffled bang. Dong Yuan hurriedly retreated more than 10 steps. The power that the faintly discernible silk ribbon instantly exploded with was truly terrifying. Even a tough and fierce cultivator like Dong Yuan could not completely withstand it. Li Daochong was still standing there watching this duel, but there was a hint of weariness in his eyes. The strength of this group of Jindan cultivators was too mediocre. Apart from their higher cultivation levels, there was nothing special about them. Li Daochong felt that they were not even as good as those fellows who had passed the 100 schools joint entrance exam. He couldn't help but yawn. He stood there and closed his eyes to rest, using only his psychokinesis to probe. This battle lasted for a long time. The two sides were in a deadlock, and it took more than an hour for the victor to be decided. Dong Yuan used the 8th level of the Dong family's consummate skill, the Inferno technique, raging flames burning the heavens. When the axe fell, it really seemed as if it could destroy heaven and earth. The blazing axe light soared hundreds of meters into the sky, and the raging flames seemed as if they wanted to burn the sky. This was already beyond the scope of a cultivation technique, and had reached the level of a low-level divine ability. In fact, the Inferno technique was a low-level divine ability that went from shallow to deep and belonged to the beginner level. Bai Yi's white phoenix silk ribbon danced in the air, dazzling the cultivators who were watching. It seemed as if heaven and earth were about to be filled. Chapter 408. Dong Yuan's axe came crashing down like a volcanic eruption, its power terrifying. Bai Yi's white phoenix silk ribbon covered the sky, forming a massive ribbon net that covered an area of several hundred meters. The white phoenix silk ribbon transformed into a white phoenix phantom. The white phoenix was one of the 10 mythological beasts of ancient times. Now, this kind of godlike spirit world creature was nearly extinct. There was no white phoenix in the Shanghua Federation. Even though it was only a very weak white phoenix phantom, it still brought about a massive visual impact to the cultivators watching from afar, as well as a subtle sense of worship. The white phoenix was once the totem god of the ancient Phoenix clan. Even Soul Formation Supreme Elders had to bow their heads in front of the white phoenix. The white phoenix phantom was only a dozen meters long, but it had a wingspan of over 20 meters. It let out a long cry as it rushed toward Dong Yuan. The raging flames instantly burned the massive white ribbon net. Bai Yi felt a pang of pain with every piece that was burned away. This white phoenix silk ribbon was something that she had spent 60 years to collect and refine. Now, half of it had been burned away by the raging flames. Bai Yi's eyes flashed with anger, and the white phoenix phantom became even more solid. Dong Yuan's axe came crashing down. He thought that he would be able to incinerate the white ribbon net and cleave at Bai Yi, but he didn't expect that such a powerful flame would be unable to penetrate the white phoenix silk ribbon net. It didn't even touch Bai Yi. He saw the white phoenix phantom hurtling toward him. Dong Yuan was horrified. He raised his axe to block, but the white phoenix phantom was useless against it. The white phoenix passed through Dong Yuan. This Jindan cultivator only saw a flash before his eyes, and then he entered a fantastical and ethereal world. Two white phoenixes danced in the air, surrounded by birds and fragrant flowers. It was like a fairyland. However, this scene only lasted for a moment. When Dong Yuan returned to reality, he felt as if his body had been hollowed out. The white phoenix phantom passed through Dong Yuan, taking away all of his spiritual energy. Dong Yuan's entire body was dispirited, and he gasped for breath. He felt as if he had fought for 3 days and 3 nights without rest. His legs were weak, and his entire body was sore and uncomfortable. It was almost like a mortal running a marathon. Dong Yuan couldn't hold the axe in his hand, and it fell to the ground. He wanted to stand up, but he couldn't, and he knelt on one knee. After the white phoenix phantom flew past Dong Yuan, not only did it not disappear, but the phantom looked even more solid. Bai Feng flew up high in the air and spun around before charging towards Bai Yi. Many of the spectating cultivators were stunned. Was Bai Yi going to attack them with this move? Li Daochong, who had his eyes closed all this time, also narrowed his eyes. This was the first time he had seen such a move. When Bai Yi and Li Daochong dealt with the Ghost King in the grotto, she did not use such a trick. It seemed that this woman did not use her full strength at that time. Li Daochong's lips moved slightly. He had underestimated her. Seeing that Bai Feng was about to rush back and pass through Bai Yi, some of the cultivators exclaimed in surprise. A few of the Jindan cultivators were also shocked. They didn't know what was going on with Bai Yi's move. It seemed that no one present had seen Bai Yi use this move before. Dong Yuan, who thought that he had lost, suddenly saw a sliver of hope that the battle would end in a draw. It seemed that Bai Yi was not familiar with this move, which resulted in a backlash. Otherwise, why would she charge back? Just as everyone was surprised, Bai Feng charged into Bai Yi's body. It disappeared in an instant. It did not pass through Dong Yuan's body as everyone had expected. Bai Feng seemed to have disappeared into Bai Yi's body. In that instant, Bai Yi's weakened aura suddenly surged, and she recovered to her peak condition. Bai Yi waved her sleeve, and the remaining half of the white phoenix silk ribbon quickly disappeared into her sleeve. Bai Yi slowly descended from the void. She looked like a woman from the mortal world, and her body emitted a faint white glow. Dong Yuan was dumbfounded. His face was ashen, and he had no choice but to admit defeat. After winning 2 consecutive battles, the 3 great clans finally lost for the 3rd time. Bai Yi defeated Dong Yuan. Not only did she defeat the latter, she did not even consume any energy. Her last move was shocking. At this moment, the Jindan cultivators present realized that Bai Yi's last move was a sacred art and not a cultivation technique. Bai Yi's strength was terrifying. At this moment, the cultivators of the Scarlet Sun planet experienced it for themselves. The 3 great experts of the Scarlet Sun planet were not randomly ranked. Old Gun, Bai Yi, and Lu Xingzhan. These 3 were recognized as the 3 great experts of the Scarlet Sun planet for the past 20 years. However, very few people had seen them in action. Not many people knew how powerful these 3 were. Lu Xingzhan had already fallen more than 2 months ago. The remaining 2, Old Gun and Bai Yi, had displayed their skills in front of so many cultivators for the first time. They did not disgrace the name of the 3 great experts. Although Old Gun had lost, it was a glorious defeat. Yi Jingtu's victory was not very convincing. Everyone knew the price of burning one's blood essence. Old Gun did not put his life on the line. If he did, Yi Jingtu might not be able to obtain the final victory even if he burned his blood essence. Bai Yi and Dong Yuan's battle seemed to be evenly matched. However, in reality, Bai Yi had done it on purpose. After figuring out Dong Yuan's moves, she used one move and won with an overwhelming advantage. The 5 Jindan cultivators on the side of the itinerant cultivators were shocked. Bai Yi's last move was flawless. How could they break it? No matter how much energy Bai Yi expended, she could use this magical power to recover instantly. In a way, Bai Yi's strength was even more terrifying than Old Gun's. She was like an unkillable cockroach. After Bai Yi's victory, the dejected and family members immediately became spirited. And Manian saw hope again. He did not expect this white fairy to have such a heaven-defying magical power. The 3 great families, who had been in high spirits just a moment ago, suddenly became nervous. Although Yi Jingtu had won, he could not fight again. Dong Yuan had lost and could not fight again. In fact, even if he could fight again, he would not be able to fight again. His body had been hollowed out, and he was extremely weak. Even with the best recovery elixirs, he would need 1 or 2 days to fully recover. It was impossible for him to recover in less than 10 minutes unless he had a heaven-defying magical power like Bai Yi's. Li Daocheng's eyes shone with interest. Bai Yi's magical power was much more advanced than the previous ones. In terms of effect, it was even more powerful than Li Daocheng's immature Heavenly Thunder spell, Eye of Thunder Punishment. Bai Yi stayed in the field, and Dong Yuan was helped off the field. The itinerant cultivators looked at each other, but no one wanted to fight immediately. In the end, Zhou Rong, the wandering fairy, saw that the other 3 were silent, and a hint of contempt appeared in her phoenix-like eyes. When Wang Qinshi first came to recruit Zhou Rong, he bragged that he was so powerful that even Old Gun was no match for him. As the leader of the itinerant cultivators, Wang Qinshi did not even dare to fart when he took the initiative to ask for a fight. His small eyes even seemed to show timidity. Lu Jingtian, the Kongming immortal, was a very cautious person. Although he did not seem to be afraid at this moment, he did not want to fight. Chun Yuan, the faceless immortal, had been defeated and could not fight. Zhang Shou, the old man of Jin Dan, was recognized as the most powerful one among the 5. However, at this moment, his old eyes were wandering, and no one knew what he was thinking. His mind was not here at all. Fine, fine. If you all don't want to fight, then I will. Zhou Rong's eyes lit up, and then she said, "Let me fight this round." As soon as Zhou Rong finished her words, Wang Qinshi immediately laughed. "Wandering fairy, thank you for your hard work. You don't have to fight Bai Yi head-on. It doesn't matter if you can't defeat her. As long as you can prevent Bai Yi's Reiki from being absorbed by her white phoenix, it will be enough." Wang Qinshi's words were very clear. Zhou Rong, it was absolutely impossible for you to defeat Bai Yi. What you had to do was to pay attention to her white phoenix. As long as the white phoenix went through your body, it didn't matter even if you lost. You just had to try your best to exhaust Bai Yi. The other 3 people, Chun Yuan, Lu Jingtian, and the old man of Kongzhu, all thought the same. Chapter 409. No one was optimistic about Zhou Rong's performance. It was no different from giving away food for free. Among the 12 Jindan cultivators present, Zhou Rong was the last one to enter the Jindan stage, and it had only been a month. Perhaps there was still Li Daocheng, who had only been here for a few days. Bai Yi stared at Zhou Rong, who was walking into the arena, with a bit of interest in her eyes. She was somewhat curious about this female cultivator who had just entered the Jindan stage on planet Qiyang. "Fairy Bai Yi, I'm sorry to offend you." Zhou Rong was neither servile nor overbearing as she looked at Bai Yi. Bai Yi nodded slightly. There was not much confrontation between the 2 female cultivators. After Zhou Rong finished her sentence very politely, she stretched out her white jade-like hand, and 2 petal-like powder gold dart-like objects appeared in her palm. The petals fall and drift, falling with the wind, silently returning to the earth. Zhou Rong's mouth uttered a rather poetic recitation. The 2 petal darts in her palms spiraled up, and then as if they were splitting, more and more petal darts danced and flew up. Zhou Rong was surrounded by petals. At this moment, it did not look like a battle between Jindan cultivators, but more like the autumn wind blowing, with the fragrance of flowers drifting and the petals flying with the wind. The word beautiful was enough to describe her. However, just as everyone was enjoying these beautiful petals, suddenly, among the hundreds of petals, a petal shot out with a swoosh. Bai Yi's eyes narrowed, and she actually felt a sense of crisis. Compared to Dong Yuan's unstoppable axe, the threat was much greater. The white phoenix silk ribbon came out of her sleeve, and with a bang, it collided with the petal, erupting with a dull sound. The place where the white phoenix silk ribbon collided with the petal was torn apart. Bai Yi was shocked. The seemingly weak petal was actually so powerful. Zhou Rong's attack had just begun. The petals in the sky had no pattern, as if they had entered a world of flowers. However, each of these beautiful petals contained a terrifying lethality and could easily kill a Foundation establishment cultivator on the spot. Bai Yi did not dare to be careless. The white phoenix silk ribbon circled around her, forming a 360-degree spiral wall with no blind spots. From afar, it looked like a white tornado. The moves of the two female cultivators were pleasing to the eye, unlike the simple and crude moves of the male cultivators. There was no beauty to speak of, only power. The moves of female cultivators were much more particular. Perhaps this was the nature of women. No matter what they did, they had to pay attention to beauty. The drifting flower petals danced faster and faster, as if there was a gust of wind stirring them. They silently shot towards Bai Yi. The petals collided with the white ribbon, producing an ear-piercing sound of friction and sparks flying in all directions. When these two pleasing moves collided with each other, one would discover how terrifying the killing intent hidden behind the beauty was. No one had expected Zhou Rong to be so strong. Bai Yi could only defend and was unable to attack. The drifting petals formed an indiscriminate attack zone that was simply unbreakable. One attacked, and the other defended. The deadlock lasted for several minutes. Neither of them could do anything to the other. The white ribbon was nibbled away bit by bit, and the number of petals was also decreasing. Many of them fell to the ground, their shapes changing. Under the high temperature produced by the friction, they were charred black. Bai Yi stood in the middle of the white ribbon. Her gentle face revealed a hint of anger. She was actually being suppressed by a little girl who had just entered the Jin Dan stage. Bang! Suddenly, with a muffled sound, the white ribbon exploded and the drifting flower petals array was shattered. A white shadow shot out from it. A white ribbon shot towards Zhou Rong like lightning. Zhou Rong was shocked. That white shadow was so fast that it had already exceeded the limit of her ability to dodge. There was no time for her to react. Zhou Rong shook her hand, and a huge petal appeared. Boom! The white ribbon collided with the huge petal, producing a loud sound. The huge petal was completely deformed. Zhou Rong was sent flying several hundred meters away. That white shadow was Bai Yi. When she appeared, Bai Yi looked somewhat unstable. Although this attack was powerful enough to send Zhou Rong flying, Bai Yi had also expended a lot of energy. Several hundred meters away, a pinkish gold flower appeared in Zhou Rong's hand. She tossed it lightly, and the flower spun out. In the void, the flower grew rapidly. In almost an instant, it became a huge flower with a diameter of more than 2 meters. Red spider lily's sole attraction. Zhou Rong's red lips opened slightly as she murmured. In the distant crowd, Li Daocheng's eyes suddenly opened. He saw the pinkish gold flower. He actually felt a trace of familiarity. The pinkish gold flower contained an extremely dense aura of death. It was the aura of death from the Hades. Li Daocheng's gaze towards Zhou Rong changed. This unfamiliar girl had secrets. She seemed to be able to absorb dead souls. The spectating cultivators all gasped. The surrounding temperature suddenly dropped. The previous battle had raised the temperature of the area by a lot. The cold aura emitted by the chill soul origin crystal had already been offset. However, the cold aura gained the upper hand at this moment. Moreover, it made people shudder. It was as if they saw the sea of the netherworld and the blooming red spider lily on the other side. Taoist Wang, we underestimated Fairy Zhou. Her strength is much more terrifying than we imagined. I'm afraid even I have no chance of winning against her. Old Man Green Bamboo, Zhang Shou sighed. His old eyes revealed a deep sense of fear. Wang Qinqi's face twitched. In his eyes, Zhou Rong was the weakest of the 5 Jin Dan itinerant cultivators. She was just cannon fodder. He did not expect Zhou Rong to be so strong that it was a little abnormal. When the flower appeared, the area within a radius of a few kilometers was no longer the human world, but the Hades. On the side of the 3 major clans, the 5 Jin Dan cultivators were shocked. Yijing Tu frowned. Zhou Rong is a ghost cultivator? Dong Yuan shook his head. No, Zhou Rong does not have any aura of death on her. It's only on that flower. It's a superior grade, mysterious spirit treasure. Shimin Jin was stunned. Could it be a Dharma treasure of the Hades? Dong Yuan shook his head again. It's not a Dharma treasure. It's a spirit treasure. However, the weapon spirit is not from the spiritual realm, but an Yin's spirit. Shimin Jin's expression changed. I see. This Zhou Rong is not simple. Yi Jingtu's face was a little gloomy. Bai Yi was already very difficult to deal with, and now Zhou Rong had appeared out of nowhere. The three major clans had no other trump cards left. He and Dong Yuan were their strongest trump cards, and they had already gone out. The remaining Shimin Jin did not have much fighting power. Even if he won one match, his opponent was not worth mentioning. Against Bai Yi and Zhou Rong, Shimin Jin had no chance of winning. In this fight, whether it was Bai Yi or Zhou Rong, no matter who won, no one would be their opponent in the following fights. The three major clans had only won 2 matches. If Bai Yi defeated Zhou Rong, the clan would also win 2 matches. The remaining 3 people on the itinerant cultivator side were nothing to be afraid of. Bai Yi could continue to win. If Zhou Rong won, the itinerant cultivator side would have 4 people who could still fight. Whether it was in terms of numbers or strength, they would be able to suppress everyone. Fellow Daoist Dong, we have to take out our final trump card, Yi Jingtu said in a deep voice. Dong Yuan's expression changed, and he said in a low voice, Fellow Daoist Yi, you have to think carefully. That trump card is not easy to control. If it goes out of control, even we will suffer. Yi Jingtu's eyes revealed a bit of ruthlessness. Fellow Daoist Dong, how can a person who wants to achieve great things without the spirit of adventure? As long as we get the Frost, Soul, Source Crystal, and auction it at the Black Prison, the resources we can exchange for will be enough for us to cultivate for several decades. Advancing to the middle stage of Jindan will not be a problem. The Frost, Soul, Source Crystal appearing on planet Crimson Sun is a blessing from the heavens. If we miss this opportunity, we won't get another one. If we miss this opportunity, I'm afraid we will be stuck at the early stage of Jindan until we die. Dong Yuan's originally hesitant expression disappeared after hearing Yi Jingtu's words. It was replaced by a resolute expression. Fellow Daoist Yi is right. We can't miss such a great opportunity. All right, let's use our trump card, Dong Yuan said while gritting his teeth. Fellow Daoist Dong, when the match comes to an end, you and I will open the receiving realm gate together and release the Minotaurs, Yi Jingtu replied. The Minotaurs and Horsemen were powerful existences among the ghost beasts of the Hades. The Minotaurs were formed by the Demon Ox clan of the demon race that had been contaminated by death energy, while the Horsemen were formed by the Demon Pegasus clan of the demon race that had been infected by death energy. Chapter 410. The pinkish-gold red spider lily had flowers but no leaves. As the flower rotated, it emitted a bewitching brilliance. Anyone who saw it would be completely captivated, unable to look away. The cultivators who were watching from afar were also captivated. Their eyes were filled with bewilderment. Many of the weaker cultivators even began to walk toward the red spider lilies unconsciously. Bai Yi's divine will condense to resist the attraction of the red spider lily. However, her body seemed to be enveloped by an invisible force field, unable to move. Bai Yi's eyes flashed with shock. This Zhou Rong was actually so strong. Her strength was far beyond that of an ordinary Jindan initial stage cultivator. The red spider lily's speed was not fast, but there was no way to avoid it. Seeing that the red spider lily was about to fly over, the flower rotated faster and faster. The petals were opening, and a black cloud was swirling around the stamen. Bai Yi bit the tip of her tongue, forcing herself to stay awake and not fall into the red spider lily's soul-attracting brilliance. Bai Yi's spirit chi surged out violently. White Phoenix Lai, a shadow flashed behind Bai Yi. The white phoenix let out a long cry and flew towards the red spider lily. This scene made Yijing Tu, who was standing 100 meters away, clench his fists. The corner of his eyes twitched. The best outcome was for both sides to suffer. The red spider lily and the white phoenix collided in the void. There was no earth-shattering sound, nor was there any violent collision. The white phoenix and the red spider lily merged together in the void. Slowly, the white phoenix's shadow became fainter and fainter. The bewitching brilliance emitted by the red spider lily also dimmed. The two great supernatural powers intertwined and nibbled at each other. They were evenly matched. A draw? Just when everyone thought that by Yi and Zhou Rong would end in a draw, the situation changed. The bewitching brilliance of the red spider lily disappeared. The black cloud in the stamen spread out and swallowed the white phoenix, which was about to disappear. Bai Yi spat out a mouthful of blood and fell from the sky. She stared at Zhou Rong and clutched her chest. She seemed unwilling but helpless. "I've lost." Zhou Rong gently clenched her slender hand, and the red spider lily rapidly shrank. The black cloud was instantly sucked into the flower's pistil and disappeared. The rogue cultivators won this round. The crowd was in an uproar. Zhou Rong won, and it wasn't a difficult victory. Bai Yi was completely suppressed when she was in her peak state. Wouldn't Zhou Rong's strength be comparable to a Jean Dan middle-stage cultivator? The Scarlet Sunstar now had another true expert. The position left by Lu Xingzhan's death had been filled by someone else. Yijing Tu had been spying on the location of the three great experts. Originally, it should have been him. However, Zhou Rong's sudden appearance completely shattered Yijing Tu's beautiful dream. Zhou Rong landed in the middle of the field and stared at them. There was not much emotion on her delicate face. However, if one's divine sense was strong enough, one would be able to sense the slight instability in Zhou Rong's psyche power. It wasn't because Zhou Rong was injured, but because she was excited. Even she didn't expect to defeat Bai Yi. Now that she knew her strength had reached such a level, it would be difficult for anyone to remain calm. Li Daochong, who was wearing a conical bamboo hat, rubbed his chin. This female cultivator was a little interesting. That pink red spider lily didn't seem very powerful, but it was actually very mysterious. Even Li Daochong would be flustered if he faced it. However, now that he had seen it for himself, he had a better idea. Divine powers could only be countered with divine powers. There was no other way. The Eye of Lightning punishment was the only technique Li Daochong had that could resist this move. Whether he could defeat, it was still a question mark. However, Yang Lightning was innately effective against all things of the netherworld. The red spider lily contained a strong aura of death, and the black cloud was its greatest mystery. Li Daochong felt that his chances of winning were still relatively high. Zhou Rong's victory boosted the morale of the rogue cultivators, who had been in low spirits. They all held their heads high and puffed out their chests. On the other hand, the infamily's side was the opposite. Amanian sat down on a stone chair, his eyes blank and at a loss. Bai Yi had been defeated, and Old Pao had also been defeated. The infamily only had one spot left, and there was no one else. Old Gun had internal injuries and couldn't continue fighting. Bai Yi's injuries weren't light either. There seemed to be a strange aura of death in her body. Who was going to fight? Ammonian's heart was dead. The heavens wanted the infamily dead, and Sinuo saw that Ammonian was in a very bad state. "Father, are you okay?" Ammonian waved his hand. Endless grief appeared on his old face. He lowered his head, unwilling to let his daughter see it. And Ding Bang gave Sinuo a look and said telepathically, "Sinuo, let father be quiet for a while." And Sinuo's eyes were filled with tears. "But who's going to fight later? I just asked Senior Bai. She said she can't continue fighting." And Ding Bang's expression was desolate. He replied in a low voice, "Then just admit defeat." And Sinuo was unwilling. "But we still have one more chance. Are we going to waste it just like that?" And Ding Bang smiled bitterly. "What do you want if we don't waste it? Who's going? You, me, or someone else? Do you want to embarrass yourself?" Amani sighed. "Sinuo, get ready. We're going home." And Sinuo was anxious. "Father, If we go back like this, how are we going to explain it to the people who kidnapped Mother? Amanian was silent for a moment. Let's leave it to fate. The siblings looked at each other, their expressions bleak. The Yin family, one of the 4 great families of Planet Crimson Sun, was actually going to resign to fate. The 5th match was between the 3 great families and the independent cultivators. Zhou Rong didn't enter the arena. Her intention was clear. She didn't expend much energy fighting by just now. The representative of the 3 great families was a Jindan cultivator hired by the Dong family. This person looked a little wretched. He had a mustache and a flag on his back. He looked like a fortune teller. He was called by Shirtong and entered the arena with his mustache. He didn't seem to be afraid of Zhou Rong, but his small eyes kept darting around. His heart was pounding, and he wanted nothing more than to admit defeat. Bai Shirtong was different from the other independent cultivators. He didn't rely on his strength to get to where he was today, but his mouth. Selling his mouth was his strength. When it came to fighting, he could bully the weak, but when faced with a strong opponent, he was more cowardly than anyone else. His life was more precious than gold. Bai Shirtong had already thought of a countermeasure. They had to fight, but it was just a formality. It was impossible for him to risk his life. Bai Shirtong took out the flag on his back and stuck it into the ground. He silently recited the incantation. A strong wind blew around them, and the flag danced in the wind. The image of a dragon seemed to appear, but it was very ethereal. His aura was indescribable. When Zhou Rong saw this, she poured out more petals than when she fought Bai Yi. However, the moment Zhou Rong made her move, the flag flew over. Several petals flew out. Whoosh whoosh. The sound of the petals breaking through the air was ear-piercing. Bai Shirtong was so scared that his balls shrank. He almost screamed. Fortunately, he controlled himself in time and raised a silver shield. Bam! Bai Shirtong flew backward and spat out a mouthful of blood. When he landed, he admitted defeat without hesitation. The flag didn't attack Zhou Rong. Instead, it circled around and returned to Bai Shirtong's back. This battle was very boring. The other Jindan cultivators from the 3 major clans could see that Bai Shirtong was just being perfunctory. However, it was a fact that he was injured, so they couldn't say anything. Yijingde looked coldly at Bai Shirtong, who was walking down the arena. The latter didn't seem to notice and even smiled at Yijingde. His skin was unusually thick. The independent cultivators won another round. The 6th round was the Yin clan's turn again. Although Yijingde was very unhappy with Zhou Rong's sudden appearance, he felt a little comforted when he saw that the Yin clan had completely withdrawn from the competition. Zhou Rong was still standing in the arena, waiting for her next opponent. There was no movement from the Yin clan's side. Old Gun and Bai Yi had both been defeated. Who else dared to go up? The cultivators who were hired had long retreated. The cultivators who were still standing beside the Yin clan were either on good terms with them or had been with them for a long time. However, there were only a few of them. The others had all retreated severally away. When Yijingde saw that there was no response from the Yin clan, he added, "Unmanian, your clan still has one more participant. What are you waiting for? Hurry up and send someone to fight." You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.